She slammed her resignation letter on his desk at 7 in the morning, hands shaking, jaw set, and Adrian Moretti didn't even look up from his coffee. "I quit," Elena Rossi said. He set the cup down slowly. Then he finally looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in 5 years. "No," he said, "you don't." She reached for the letter. He put his hand over it. "Like it or not," Adrian said quietly, "you're staying. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to this channel right now, hit the bell so you never miss an episode, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. Elena Rossi had spent 5 years learning how to be invisible. Not the kind of invisible that made people look past you, the kind that made people underestimate you. She wore plain colors. She kept her voice neutral. She answered questions before they were asked, solved problems before anyone noticed they existed, and moved through Adrian Moretti's world like water moving through cracks in stone, quiet, patient, and absolutely essential. She had been his personal secretary since she was 26 years old. She had taken his calls at 2 in the morning. She had managed his schedule during the worst months of his empire's expansion. She had sat in rooms where things were discussed that no civilian was ever supposed to hear, and she had kept every single secret without being asked. She was good at her job because her life depended on it. And now, at 31, she was done. The resignation letter had taken her 3 weeks to write. Not because she didn't know what to say, she knew exactly what to say, but because every time she sat down to write it, her hands started shaking. Not from fear of him, from the weight of everything she'd have to leave behind. The routine, the clarity, the strange quiet comfort of knowing exactly where she belonged, even if where she belonged was dangerous. But she couldn't stay, not anymore. She had told herself it would be simple. Walk in, put the letter on the desk, walk out. He couldn't stop her. She wasn't a prisoner. She was an employee, and employees resigned every single day without the world ending. What she hadn't counted on was the way he looked at her. Adrian Moretti was 41 years old and looked like a man who had never once been surprised by anything. He had dark eyes the color of aged whiskey, warm when he wanted them to be, cold when he needed them to be, and utterly unreadable the rest of the time. He was tall and lean, and moved like someone who had learned long ago that stillness was a form of power. He wore expensive suits and kept his jaw clean-shaved and his office immaculate, and in 5 years Elena had never once seen him rattled. Until she put that letter on his desk, he didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then he set down his coffee cup with the kind of careful deliberateness that told her he was working very hard to appear calm, and he looked at her, not at the letter, at her, and something shifted behind his eyes that she had never seen before. It looked almost like panic. "What is this?" he asked. "You can read," she said. His jaw tightened. "Elena." "It's a 2-week notice," she said. "Standard. I've already begun transitioning my files. I've documented every ongoing project, every contact, every protocol. Whoever you hire next will have everything they need. I'm not hiring anyone next. That's your decision to make." He stood up slowly, and Elena held her ground, which was harder than it sounded, because Adrian Moretti standing up and walking toward you was the kind of thing that made very brave people take a step back. She didn't move. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." "Elena, sit down. I'm not your employee for much longer, Mr. Moretti. You can stop giving me orders." Something crossed his face, not anger, which she'd expected. Something rawer than anger. He stopped 2 feet away from her and looked at her like he was trying to read something written in a language he'd never learned. 5 years, he said. Not a word, not a complaint. Not a single indication that you were. He stopped. What happened? Nothing happened. People don't leave nothing. People leave jobs all the time. It's called moving on. Not you. His voice dropped. Not like this. She made herself look at him steadily. "Respectfully, Mr. Moretti, you don't know me as well as you think you do." It was exactly the wrong thing to say. She saw it register in his expression, a flash of something that looked almost like hurt before the shutters came down and the cold came back. Adrian Moretti did not get hurt. Adrian Moretti got calculating. "We're done here," he said quietly. "Go back to your office. We'll discuss this later. There's nothing to discuss." "I disagree." He picked up the letter, folded it once, and slid it into his jacket pocket. "This conversation isn't over. Mr. Moretti, go to your office, Elena." She went. Not because he told her to, because she needed a minute to remember how to breathe. Her office was a glass-walled room adjacent to his, small and efficient, and organized down to the millimeter. She had always liked it for the same reason she had liked working for him. Everything had a place. Everything was clear. In a life that had been built on managing chaos, clarity was the closest thing to peace she'd ever found. She sat at her desk and stared at her hands and told herself she hadn't made a mistake. She had made the right choice. The only choice. She had pushed it as long as she possibly could, and now the situation had shifted in a way that made staying impossible, and she needed to get out before anyone got hurt. She just needed 2 weeks. She just needed him to let her go. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she'd memorized years ago and had never saved under a real name. "He's not going to make this easy." She typed back, "I know." "Are you sure about this?" She stared at the screen for a long moment. "I don't have a choice anymore." She deleted the thread, the way she always did, and put her phone face down on the desk and started going through her files like nothing had happened. Like her hands weren't still trembling, like her heart wasn't doing something complicated and painful in her chest. 2 weeks, she told herself. Just 2 weeks. Adrian Moretti spent the rest of the morning doing something he had not done in years. He paced. His second-in-command, Dante Ricci, watched him from the leather chair in the corner with the expression of a man who had seen many things, but was seeing something new and was not entirely sure how to feel about it. "She gave me a resignation letter," Adrian said. "I know," Dante said. "You told me. She's been here 5 years, I know." "She didn't give any reason. Did you ask?" "She said it was time to move on." Adrian stopped pacing and stood at the window, looking out at the New York skyline, like the answer to something was written in the concrete and glass. "That's not a reason. It might be to her. Something is wrong." Dante shifted in his chair. He was 45, broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper beard and the eyes of someone who had spent decades managing a dangerous man's volatile impulses. He had been with Adrian longer than anyone. He knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. He chose to speak. "What makes you think something is wrong as opposed to?" "Because I know her," Adrian said flatly. "Elena Rossi doesn't do anything without a reason. She doesn't make impulsive decisions. She plans everything 3 steps ahead. If she's leaving, she's been planning it for months, and something triggered her to move the timeline." He turned from the window. "I want to know what, Adrian. She knows things about this organization that could." "She would never," Dante said sharply. "Don't even say it." "I know she wouldn't." And he did know it, which was the strange thing. He didn't believe for a single second that Elena was a threat. The thought had crossed his mind for exactly half a moment before he dismissed it with the certainty of a man who understood loyalty when he saw it. "That's not why I'm worried." "Then why are you worried?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Because she looks scared," he said. "Not of me, of something else, and she was trying very hard to make sure I didn't notice." Dante looked at him for a long time. Then he said quietly, "So what do you want to do?" "Find out what she's running from." Elena spent her lunch hour in a diner 12 blocks from the Moretti building. She always ate lunch away from the office. It was the one rule she had imposed on herself years ago, 1 hour, every day, where she was just a woman sitting in a booth eating a sandwich, not Adrian Moretti's secretary, not the keeper of 1,000 dangerous secrets, not the person standing between organized chaos and complete collapse. She was halfway through her soup when a man slid into the seat across from her. He was heavyset, 50s, with the kind of face that had been rearranged by violence and had never quite settled back into its original shape. He was wearing a jacket that cost less than her lunch and smiling in a way that had nothing to do with warmth. "Ms. Rossi," he said pleasantly, "I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk." Everything in her went very still. "I think you have the wrong person," she said. Elena Maria Rossi, personal secretary to Adrian Moretti for 5 years. Apartment on the Upper West Side. Lease ending next month. You didn't renew it. Interesting. Passport renewed 6 weeks ago. I like the new haircut in the photo, by the way. He tilted his head. Should I keep going? She set her spoon down carefully. What do you want? Just to deliver a message. He folded his hands on the table like a man settling in for a polite conversation. Mr. Bellini wants you to know that he's aware you're leaving. And he wants you to know that your little secret, the one you've been carrying for, 4 years now. is something he finds very interesting. Her blood went cold. He also wants you to know, the man continued pleasantly, that if you leave quietly, he has no reason to share that information with anyone. But if you make noise, if you do anything that draws attention, if you go to Adrian Moretti and tell him what you've been sitting on, he let the sentence hang. Then what? Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Then things get complicated for everyone. He stood up, straightened his jacket. Mr. Bellini just wants a smooth transition. He thinks the Moretti empire is going to look very different in a few months, and he wants people in position who understand how to adapt. He smiled that warmth-free smile again. Have a nice lunch, Ms. Rossi. He walked out. Elena sat very still for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone, deleted the contact she shouldn't have had, cleared 3 apps, and sat back and stared at the wall and understood that everything had just gotten significantly worse. She got back to the office, 12 minutes late. Adrian was waiting at her desk. Not sitting in her chair, not rifling through her things, just standing there, arms folded, watching the door like he'd known exactly when she'd walk through it. She almost stopped in the doorway. Almost. You're late, he said. I'm always back by 1:15. It's 1:27. I'll add 12 minutes to my remaining time. He didn't smile. We need to talk. We talked this morning. We talked around each other this morning. He uncrossed his arms and walked toward her slowly, stopping at the edge of her desk, a careful distance that told her he'd thought about how close was too close. Something is going on with you. I want you to tell me what it is. Nothing is going on with me. You haven't looked me in the eye since you walked in. She looked him in the eye, directly, unflinchingly, the way she'd practiced in the mirror more times than she'd ever admit. Is this better? She asked. Don't do that. Do what? Perform calm at me. His voice softened by exactly 1 degree, which from him was extraordinary. Elena, I've watched you manage crisis situations that would have broken experienced men. I know what you look like when you're actually calm, and I know what you look like when you're working very hard to pretend. Right now, you're pretending. He paused. What happened at lunch? Her heart kicked hard. I had soup, she said. It was fine. He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, you took 12 minutes longer than usual. You came back without your usual container. You always bring leftovers. And you're standing slightly to the left of where you normally stand when you're in your own office, which means you're keeping the desk between us as a barrier. He tilted his head. I pay attention, Elena. I always have. She hadn't known that. She should have known that. You're overthinking it, she said, and her voice only wavered slightly at the end. Am I? He held her gaze. Someone approached you. Not a question. She said nothing. Who was it? No one. Elena, I said no one, Mr. Moretti. She moved around the desk to her chair, putting herself behind it the way he'd correctly identified, because she needed something solid between them right now, something that said, boundary, something that said this far and no further. I appreciate your concern. I don't need it. Please let me finish my workday. He didn't move for a long time. Then he said quietly, you're going to tell me eventually. I'm going to work for 2 more weeks, and then I'm going to leave. No, he said. You're not. He picked up a file from the corner of her desk, her file, she realized, the transition documentation she'd been preparing, and set it back down without opening it. I'm not accepting your resignation. You don't have a choice. I always have a choice. His eyes met hers, and so do you. You can tell me what's happening, or you can keep performing calm and pretending nothing is wrong, and I will spend those 2 weeks finding out on my own. He straightened. I'd prefer you told me. I'd find it much faster. He walked out. She sat down because her legs insisted on it and pressed her palms flat on her desk and breathed. He was right that he'd find it faster. Adrian Moretti had resources that made the concept of secrets almost theoretical. There was very little in this city that stayed hidden from him long. But there was one thing she had kept from him for 4 years, and kept perfectly, because she'd understood from the very beginning that knowing it would put them both in danger. She'd kept it to protect him, and now Marco Bellini knew she had it, which meant the protection had a timer on it. She opened her desk drawer and looked at the small, battered thumb drive she'd carried with her every day for 4 years. The thing Adrian didn't know, the thing that had cost her more than she'd ever calculated. She closed the drawer. 2 weeks, she told herself again. But this time, she wasn't sure she believed it. Dante Ricci appeared in Adrian's office at 4 in the afternoon, with an expression that told Adrian he'd found something. He closed the door, he sat, he put a folder on the desk. "You asked me to look into her," Dante said. "I asked you to make sure she was safe," Adrian said precisely. "There's a difference. Semantics." Dante pushed the folder across the desk. "She renewed her passport 6 weeks ago. New passport, photo, new hair. She didn't renew her apartment lease, which comes up at the end of next month. She has a storage unit in Queens under a slightly different spelling of her middle name. 3 months of rent paid in advance. She also," he paused, "has a one-way ticket to Montreal. Purchased 5 weeks ago, leaving in 16 days. 16 days. 2 weeks' notice with 2 days to spare." Adrian stared at the folder. "She's been planning this for months. At least 5 or 6 based on the timeline." She didn't say a word. "No, she sat across from me every day for months while she was planning to disappear, and she didn't say word." He heard something in his own voice that he didn't entirely recognize, and he worked to flatten it before he continued. "Dante, what is she running from? That's where it gets complicated." Dante leaned forward. 6 weeks ago, around the same time she renewed her passport, there was movement in Bellini's operation. Low level, hard to see if you weren't looking for it. But some of his people started asking questions about the Moretti organization's inner structure. Specifically, he hesitated, about who Adrian Moretti trusts enough to keep close. The room went very quiet. "She came up," Dante said. "Her name came up in Bellini's intelligence gathering. We're not sure why. We're not sure what he thinks he knows. But Marco Bellini has been paying attention to Elena Rossi for at least 6 weeks." Adrian's expression didn't change. Nothing about him moved. And yet the temperature in the room dropped noticeably, in the way it always did when Adrian Moretti understood that someone had made a mistake they weren't going to be able to take back. "She was approached," Adrian said, "almost certainly. Today, at lunch." Dante nodded slowly. "That would explain the 12-minute discrepancy. She knows Bellini is coming. That's why she's leaving." Adrian stood up slowly, the way he always did when something had gone from complicated to dangerous. "She's not running from me. No, she's trying to draw Bellini away from me." He said it quietly, and the full weight of it landed on him harder than he'd expected, which was itself information. "She thinks if she disappears, Bellini loses whatever leverage he thinks he has, and the threat to the organization goes with her. That would be exactly what she'd do." His voice was flat with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, and was made of both of those things at their worst. "She'd sacrifice herself to protect us. She'd vanish to Montreal with her storage unit and her one-way ticket, and she'd spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder so that we didn't have to." He looked at Dante. "She's been doing it this entire time. Whatever she knows, whatever she's been keeping, she's been carrying it alone to protect this organization." Dante said nothing. "Find out what Bellini thinks he has on her," Adrian said. "Everything. I want to know what she's been sitting on and for how long." "Adrian, she's not leaving." His voice was quiet and absolute and brooked nothing in the way of argument. "And she's not facing Bellini alone. Whatever she's been protecting me from." He paused, and, when he continued, his voice had dropped to something close to private. "That's over. Starting now." She was still at her desk at 7 in the evening. She often stayed late. The building was quieter after 6, and quiet was the only thing that made the kind of work she did feel sustainable. She could think more clearly when the phone stopped ringing and the hallways emptied, and it was just her and the files and the unblinking glow of her monitor. Tonight she was working through transition documents that she no longer believed she'd need, because some part of her had already understood the way you understood things before your brain caught up that this wasn't going to go the way she'd planned. She heard his footsteps before he appeared in the doorway. She knew his footsteps. She'd known them for 5 years. The particular cadence of them, the weight, the pace. She could tell the difference between Adrian walking to a meeting and Adrian walking toward something that needed handling, and tonight it was the second. She kept her eyes on her screen. "The building is mostly empty," she said. "You should go home. So should you." He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk, the one she used for guests, which he almost never used because he almost never sat across from her. He stood, and he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at her with the expression she'd always feared most from him. Not cold, not commanding, direct. Marco Bellini knows who you are, he said. She stopped typing. He had someone approach you today, Adrian said. And whatever they said, it scared you. Not the ordinary kind of scared that you'd never let me see anyway. The deep kind. The kind that makes you delete things on your phone in a diner and come back 12 minutes late and stand slightly to the left. He held her gaze. What does Bellini think he has on you, Elena? She was quiet for a long moment. Nothing, she said. That's not true, Mr. Moretti. Adrian. It was the first time he'd asked her to call him that, ever, in 5 years, and it landed like something thrown into still water, rippling outward in ways that changed the shape of everything. We're past, Mr. Moretti. Tell me what's going on. She looked at him. Really looked at him the way she'd been careful not to for years, because looking at Adrian Moretti that way, without a desk between them as armor or a job as context, was the kind of thing that made careful women lose their careful. He looked tired, she realized. Not physically tired. The other kind, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. She recognized it because it was exactly what she saw every morning in her own mirror. There's something I've known for 4 years, she said, and even saying that much felt like setting down a weight she hadn't realized was crushing her. Something I found out by accident. Something that she stopped. If you know it, it changes things. For the organization. For you, she paused. For us, he didn't flinch at the word. Tell me, I need you to understand that I kept it from you to protect you. Not because I was working against you, not because I was waiting to use it. I kept it because the knowing of it put a target on me, and I could manage a target on me. I couldn't manage one on you. Elena, 4 years ago, she said, and the words finally started coming, like water breaking through a crack in stone, slow and then all at once. I was working late. The kind of late where I wasn't supposed to be here. And I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, about the Moretti organization. About an attack. About someone who gave the order for that attack. She watched his expression change very slightly, the way glaciers moved, barely perceptible and then suddenly catastrophic. The person who gave the order was someone you trusted. The silence was complete. Someone, Adrian said carefully, who is still in my organization. Yes, he sat back slowly. The controlled stillness of him was absolute, but she could see it now, the thing behind the stillness, the gathering of something vast and cold and furious, like weather accumulating before a storm. Who, he said. If I tell you here, she said, and this office isn't clean. If Bellini has ears somewhere, then you're in danger before you can move. He pulled out his phone, typed something, put it away. In 30 minutes, this room will be swept. No ears anywhere in this building. He looked at her steadily. You said the person is still in my organization. Yes. How long have you known? 4 years, 2 months, 11 days. She said it without hesitation, because she'd counted. She had counted every single one. Something moved through his expression. Not pity, he didn't do pity. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like the beginning of understanding a terrible thing. You have been sitting in this office, he said slowly, for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Knowing that someone in my organization ordered an attack on my family. Knowing who, and you said nothing, I said nothing. Because the moment I told you, you'd move. And moving would tell whoever had ears that I knew. And then I'd be dead, and whoever it is would go deeper underground, and you'd never find them. She held his gaze. I was more useful to you as a secret than I would have been as a warning. He stared at her for a very long time. Then he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, you spent 4 years protecting me from something I didn't even know was threatening me. Yes, alone. I was always going to leave eventually, she said. Before the information became a liability instead of an asset. The plan was to get far enough away that I couldn't be used against you, and then send you what I knew through a channel Bellini couldn't trace. She looked down at her desk drawer. I have everything documented, every piece of evidence. Every recording. I was going to make sure you got it. From Montreal, he said. She looked up. He saw the surprise on her face and almost smiled but didn't. I know about Montreal, he said. I know about the storage unit and the passport and the lease. He paused. I know because I went looking the moment I felt something was wrong with you. His eyes didn't leave hers. "Because I pay attention, Elena. I always have. I told you that." She didn't know what to do with that. She had never known what to do with the moments, small, rare, carefully contained, when Adrian Moretti showed her that he was paying attention in ways that went beyond professional utility. "Bellini knows I have the information," she said. "He has someone who told him I know something. He doesn't know what I know exactly, but he knows it's enough to change things." She pressed her palms flat on the desk. "If I stay, he uses me as leverage against you. If I leave, he follows me, and it's worse." She looked at him. "There isn't a clean exit anymore. That's why I came to you this morning. Not because I had a better option, because I was out of time." "You came to me," he said, "by handing me a letter and telling me you were leaving. I was going to figure out the rest. You were going to walk into Bellini's orbit alone, with a thumb drive full of evidence, and figure out the rest." "I've managed worse." "No," he said, and the flatness of it stopped her. "You haven't, and you're not going to." He stood, and the shift in the energy of the room was immediate, like a held breath finally released. "You're staying. You're not going anywhere near Bellini without me. And tomorrow morning, when this room has been swept clean, and I know we're not being heard, you're going to tell me everything." "Adrian, everything," he said. "All of it. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days, everything you've been carrying. I want it." She looked at him across her desks, this man she had organized her entire professional life around protecting, this man she had kept secrets for and from, this man she had spent years careful not to look at too directly, because careful women who looked at Adrian Moretti too directly stopped being quite so careful. "And then what?" she asked. He looked at her for a long, still moment. "Then we deal with it together," he said. "You're not doing this alone anymore." He walked to the door, stopped. "Go home tonight," he said, without turning around. "I'll have 2 of my men outside your building. Don't argue, don't tell me you don't need it." "You do." He paused, and Elena. "Yes, in 4 years," he said quietly, "you never once asked me for anything. Not one thing." He finally turned and looked at her. "Tomorrow, I'm going to need you to let me help you. I need you to trust that I can handle the truth, whatever it is, without breaking." His voice dropped. "Can you do that?" She looked at him, and she said, for the first time in 4 years, the most honest thing she'd said in this room, "I don't know." He nodded, as if that were the answer he expected. As if honesty, even uncertain honesty, was enough. "That's okay," he said. "We'll figure out the rest." He left. Elena sat alone in the quiet of her office, with the thumb drive in her desk drawer, and 4 years of carefully held breath, finally starting, just barely, to let go. She'd spent 4 years keeping his world safe from a truth she'd never wanted to know. Tomorrow, she was going to have to tell him everything. And she understood, sitting in that quiet room with the city noise drifting up from 12 floors below, that the moment she did, the moment she let Adrian Moretti into the thing she'd been carrying alone, nothing between them was ever going to be the same. The only question left was whether that was a disaster or a beginning. She didn't know that either. But for the first time in 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days, she wasn't alone in not knowing. And somehow, terrifyingly, impossibly, that felt like something. She didn't sleep. She'd known she wouldn't. She'd gone through the motions anyway, went home, changed out of her work clothes, made tea she didn't drink, sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and listened to the city the way she always did when her mind refused to quiet. 12 floors down, she knew 2 of Adrian's men were parked outside her building. She hadn't looked, she didn't need to. She could feel it, the strange, unfamiliar weight of someone standing between her and the thing she'd been bracing for, alone. It should have felt like surveillance, like control. It felt like the first time in 4 years that she could take a full breath. That scared her more than Bellini's man in the diner. More than the countdown she'd been living under for weeks. More than anything she'd planned for, because she had planned for almost everything except the specific terror of wanting to be protected by the one person who had the power to destroy her if he chose to. She was up before 5, at her desk by 6:15. She had the thumb drive in her jacket pocket, and the weight of it was the same as it had always been, small, light, and enormous all at once. Adrian was already in his office. Of course he was. She could see him through the glass partition, standing at his window with a coffee cup she was almost certain hadn't been touched. He'd been there long enough that his shoulders had developed a particular set to them, not tense exactly, but loaded. The posture of a man working through something difficult in the privacy of his own head. She had memorized a lot of things about him over 5 years. She'd told herself it was professional necessity. She was beginning to suspect she hadn't been entirely honest with herself. He saw her the moment she sat down. He didn't move right away, just acknowledged her presence with the slight shift of his attention that she'd learned to recognize as his version of hello. Then he walked to the glass door and opened it. "Room's been swept," he said. "Twice. Nothing. When did they finish?" "3 this morning." A pause. "I didn't sleep either." She looked up at him. He held her gaze without apology, without performance. He had always been the most undefended version of himself at the early hour, before the day built its armor around him. "Coffee?" she asked. "I need the truth more than coffee." He walked in and sat across from her again in the guest chair, the same way he had the night before. He was establishing a pattern, she realized, not sitting behind his desk, not standing over her. Across from her, level, start wherever you need to start. She took the thumb drive out of her pocket and set it on the desk between them. He looked at it. He didn't reach for it. 4 years ago, she said, it was the night of the Caruso dinner. "You remember that night?" Something moved through his expression. "I remember." She knew he did. The Caruso dinner was one of those nights in the Moretti organization's history that nobody talked about directly and everybody remembered. A negotiation gone wrong, 3 men dead before midnight. Adrian had spent the following week in a kind of controlled fury that had made the entire building walk lighter and speak softer. "Everyone thought it was a Caruso setup," Elena said. "You thought it was a Caruso setup." "It wasn't," he said. "Not a question, no." She folded her hands on the desk. "I was here that night, in this office. You'd sent everyone home, but I was finishing the DeLuca contract because it had to go out the next morning and I'd fallen behind. You didn't know I was still here." She watched his face. "I was in the file room when I heard voices in your office. I thought it was you. I almost walked in, but it wasn't me. You were at the dinner already. The voice I heard was..." She stopped. Made herself say it cleanly. It was Nico. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Nico Ferraro, Adrian's chief of operations, 22 years in the Moretti organization. The man who had been at Adrian's side through every power shift, every territorial dispute, every moment of rebuilding. The man Adrian had trusted with the structural backbone of everything he'd built. Adrian's expression didn't collapse, it didn't shatter. It did something more controlled and more devastating. It went completely, utterly still in the way that faces went still when a person was absorbing something that was going to rearrange everything they understood about their own life. "Nico," he said, one word. He wasn't alone, he was on the phone. I heard his half of it. He was telling someone I never found out who that the setup was in place. That the Caruso situation would be blamed cleanly. That by morning you'd be convinced the Carusos had tried to take you out, which would push you into a retaliation posture that would. She stopped. That would cost you everything, politically, financially. That you'd spend the next 2 years fighting a war with the Carusos while someone else moved in behind you. While someone else moved in, Adrian repeated quietly. "Bellini," she said. He said Bellini's name twice. The temperature in the room dropped in the way it only did when Adrian Moretti hit a specific kind of cold, not the cold of immediate anger, but the cold of a man who was processing betrayal on a scale that went beyond any standard emotional vocabulary. She had seen him angry. She had seen him calculated. She had never seen him hit this specific kind of stillness before, and it was the most frightening thing she had ever witnessed in this office. "He's been working with Bellini," Adrian said, "for at least 4 years. Probably longer, and you heard all of this. I recorded it," she said. "On my phone. Instinct, I had it in my hand. I hit record before I'd even consciously decided to. I have 19 minutes and 40 seconds of audio." She nodded toward the thumb drive. "Along with financial records I've been quietly pulling for the past 3 years. Wire transfers that didn't match any legitimate Moretti account. They were small enough to miss if you weren't looking specifically for them." "I was looking specifically. You've been building a case," he said. "I've been building insurance," she corrected. "I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed to have it before I left, so I could get it to you safely." From Montreal, from somewhere he couldn't trace. He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him work through it, not the information itself. She suspected he was already several steps past the information, but something underneath it. Something more personal. 19 minutes and 40 seconds, he said. You've listened to it. Hundreds of times. You've known for 4 years that the man sitting to my right in every meeting I've had, the man who has access to every operational detail of everything I've built, he stopped. And you said nothing. I said nothing, because the moment I said something, Nico would know I knew, and I would be dead before the week was out. And you would lose the evidence and lose me and still not know who Nico's contact was inside the organization. She held his gaze. I made a calculation. I understood that it was a terrible one. I made it anyway. You made a calculation, he said slowly, that your life was expendable if it meant protecting the evidence. I made a calculation that my life was worth less than the information. It wasn't, he said. The flatness of it brooked no argument. It isn't. You don't get to make that decision. I already made it. Then you were wrong. He stood abruptly, moved to the window, not in agitation. She understood, but because he needed to put some distance between himself and the thing he was feeling, which was large enough to be uncomfortable. 4 years, he said quietly, to the glass more than to her. You sat 3 feet away from me every day for 4 years and carried this. Someone had to. It should have been me. You couldn't have. Not safely. He turned. Don't tell me what I could have handled. I'm not questioning what you could have handled, she said steadily. I'm telling you that the safest vessel for that information was someone Nico wouldn't look at twice. Someone he'd already dismissed. Someone who was just the secretary. She let that settle. He never suspected me. Not once in 4 years, because I was invisible to him in exactly the way I needed to be. Something crossed his face. She'd said it, matter-of-factly, without bitterness, because it was true, and she'd long since stopped feeling sorry for herself about it. But she saw the moment it landed on him, really landed, the understanding that she had used the exact dynamic she'd spent years being diminished by as a weapon. That her invisibility, which had been imposed on her by the assumption that she didn't matter, had been the thing that kept them both alive. Crossed the room in 4 steps and picked up the thumb drive. I need an hour, he said. Take what you need. After that, we're going to talk about what happens next. His eyes met hers. Together, you're not making any more calculations that trade your life for evidence. Are we clear? She didn't answer immediately. Elena. Clear, she said. He held her gaze for one more beat, long enough that it stopped being professional and became something else, and then he walked back to his office with the thumb drive and closed the door. She sat very still for a moment. Then she put her hands in her lap, where nobody could see them shake. The hour stretched to 2. She knew he was listening to the recording. She knew, because she had listened to it so many times herself, that she knew exactly how long each revelation took to register, how long the silence lasted between Nico's sentences, how the 19 minutes and 40 seconds felt like both forever and not nearly long enough. She handled 3 incoming calls, rescheduled 2 meetings, and responded to 14 emails, and she did all of it on autopilot while some other part of her brain tracked the quality of silence coming from behind that closed door. Dante arrived at 8:45. He stopped at her desk the way he always did. Dante was one of the few people in the organization who actually stopped at her desk rather than moving past it, who had always treated her like a person with information rather than a piece of furniture with a phone, and he looked at her with the briefly neutral expression of a man who knew something significant was happening and wasn't yet sure how much he was supposed to know. He called me in, Dante said. He's inside, she said. He'll want privacy for a few more minutes. Right. Dante didn't move. Are you all right? It was such a simple question. She had been asked it 1,000 times in her life, in 1,000 different contexts, and had answered it automatically and dishonestly every single time, because she was the kind of person who was always all right, who was professionally required to be all right, who had structured her entire identity around the competent management of situations that made other people not all right. I don't know yet, she said. Dante looked at her for a moment, and something in his expression softened in the way that big, battle-hardened men's expressions sometimes softened unexpectedly. Whatever it is, he said, he'll handle it. I know he will. And he'll protect you in the process. He's not always good at showing it, But Dante stopped. Started again. You matter to this organization, Ms. Rossi. You have for a long time. Longer than you probably know. Before she could answer, Adrian's door opened. He looked at Dante. Inside, he said. Then he looked at Elena. You too. She had been in that office 1,000 times. She had sat in every chair in various configurations, had stood at every window, had moved through it, with the unconscious familiarity of a space that was as well known to her as her own apartment. But she had never sat across from Adrian Moretti and Dante Ricci simultaneously, while Adrian held a thumb drive, and Dante had the expression of a man who had just been told something that fundamentally altered his understanding of the last 4 years. She told you, Dante said to Adrian. She told me everything. Dante turned to Elena, and there was something in his face she'd never seen directed at her before, a kind of deep, complicated respect that landed differently than the professional kind she was used to. How long have you been sitting on this alone? 4 years, Adrian said, before she could answer. She calculated that the information was safer with her than with anyone who would act on it. She's been protecting this organization from a threat I didn't know existed. He set the thumb drive on his desk. Nico. Dante went very still. Bellini. Adrian added. 4 years, possibly longer. Dante sat back in his chair and pressed his hand over his mouth and stared at the ceiling for a moment in the way of someone recalibrating a very large number of things simultaneously. Then he lowered his hand and looked at Lena with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who was rewiring his understanding of her from the ground up. The Caruso night, he said. She was here, Adrian said. She heard Nico on the phone. She recorded it. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, fine as a hairline fracture, that Elena suspected only she was close enough to hear. 19 minutes, my God, Dante said quietly. Bellini knows she has something, Adrian continued. He doesn't know the specifics. His man approached her yesterday at lunch. Threatened her, told her to disappear quietly. He paused. She was in the process of doing exactly that, but not for the reasons Bellini thought. She was trying to draw the attention away from us and deliver the evidence through a clean channel. From a distance, Dante said, looking at her. Montreal, she said simply. Dante was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Adrian. Nico is in the building right now. I know. He has access to everything. I know. Adrian's voice was precise and cold, which is why the next thing we discuss is how we contain this without tipping him off. The moment he knows we know, he'll move. His eyes cut to Dante. He'll also move if he thinks Elena is still here and talking. Elena understood before he finished the sentence. You want him to think I'm leaving. I want him to think exactly what he's been told, to expect that you're leaving quietly, that the threat to Bellini's operation has resolved itself, and that there's no reason to accelerate whatever timeline they've been working toward. Adrian looked at her steadily. Which means you need to behave like someone who is winding down. Business as usual, 2 weeks' notice, no visible change. While you build the case against him, while I use what you've built, he corrected. The financial records, the audio, that's already a case. What I need now is the thread that connects Nico to Bellini's current operations. Because if Bellini sent someone to warn you, he's close to moving. Whatever they've been planning, the timeline just compressed. He said, Bellini thinks the Moretti Empire is going to look very different in a few months, Elena said. The man in the diner, he said that specifically. Adrian and Dante exchanged a look that carried an entire conversation in it. The summit, Dante said. The summit, Adrian confirmed. Elena looked between them. What summit? In 3 weeks, the 5 major crime families in the Northeast are meeting to renegotiate territorial boundaries. It's the most significant internal political event in this region in 15 years. Adrian's voice was flat and steady. If Bellini has a man inside this organization, if Nico is feeding him information about our position going in, our alliances, our vulnerabilities, he could walk into that summit already knowing how to dismantle everything you've built, she finished. Or he could walk in with evidence of wrongdoing that delegitimizes our standing entirely, Dante said. Fabricated evidence, planted through Nico, things that would make the other families distance themselves before we could counter. Elena felt the scope of it land on her all at once, the full, terrible weight of what she'd been sitting next to for 4 years without knowing this final piece. She had known about the betrayal. She had not known about the mechanism. She had not known that the Caruso setup had been the opening move in a strategy that stretched years forward into a specific, devastating endgame. He's been patient, she said. Bellini's always been patient, Adrian said. It's the thing about him that makes him dangerous. He doesn't act on impulse, he builds. He looked at her. Which is why you being in that diner yesterday worries me. He doesn't move unless he's ready to move. He wanted me gone before the summit. He wanted any loose variables removed. Adrian stood, and the shift in him was palpable from the morning's careful stillness into something more active, more operational, the mode she recognized as Adrian solving a problem, rather than Adrian absorbing a blow. You're not a loose variable anymore. You're the center of this. His eyes found hers. Which means I need you close. I can still play it like I'm leaving, she said immediately, because she understood the operational logic, even through the personal weight of it. He's expecting me to go, if I go through the normal motions. I need you in this building, where I can see you, he said, and the precision with which he said it, not where we can protect you, not where security can cover you, but where I can see you did something to the air in the room. Dante noticed. He looked carefully at his own hands. 2 weeks, she said. I'll play out the 2 weeks. I'll behave like someone in the process of leaving. And in the meantime, Adrian said, I need you to think about everything else you might have. Everything you've noticed about Nico over 4 years that you filed away and didn't act on. Behavioral patterns, timing, anything that seemed slightly off. He held her gaze. Because you've been watching him, without him knowing you were watching him. And I don't think you only noticed the Caruso night. He was right, she had filed things away. Small things, phone calls that didn't fit the schedule, scheduling conflicts that resolved themselves too conveniently, budget discrepancies too minor to flag, but present consistently if you looked over long enough periods. She had filed all of it, under uncertainty, because she hadn't been sure enough to do anything with it, and acting on uncertainty when the man you were uncertain about could have you killed was not a risk she'd been willing to take. I have a list, she said. Dante looked up. Not on the drive, she said. In my head. I've kept it in my head because everything I wrote down was something that could be found. She looked at Adrian. Give me an hour. I'll write everything I can remember. Do it here, he said, in this office, Adrian. Here, he said again, with a quiet finality that she had learned over 5 years, meant the discussion was finished. Where I can see you. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she pulled her chair around, sat at the side of his desk, and picked up a pen. She wrote for 40 minutes. Adrian worked through the financial records on the drive. Dante made calls, careful ones, to people he trusted in ways that Adrian had verified and re-verified over years. Nobody said anything about Nico directly, not on a line that Nico might have any access to. At 9:50, Elena's phone rang. The display showed N. Ferraro. She looked at it. Adrian looked at it. Answer, he said quietly. Normal. You're leaving in 2 weeks. You have nothing to hide. She picked up. Good morning, Nico. Elena. Nico Ferraro had a voice that she had once found reassuring, warm, avuncular, the voice of a man who had always treated her with the particular benevolent condescension of someone who considered her useful, but not significant. She heard it differently now. She had heard it differently for 4 years. I heard a rumor that you're leaving us. Word travels fast, she said. Her voice was perfectly level. I gave my notice yesterday. That's a real shame. A pause that was calibrated to sound casual and landed slightly differently to someone listening for seams. Any particular reason? Somewhere better calling. Just time, she said. 5 years is a long run. It is. Has Moretti taken it well? He's been very professional about it. She looked at Adrian as she said it. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, still and focused, and something else underneath that. It's all very amicable. Good. Another pause. Listen, I was going to stop by anyway today. A few things to hand off before the summit. Adrian likes having everything documented in advance. Maybe you could help me pull some of the Q3 territorial files. You know where everything is better than anyone. The territorial files, summit documentation. She kept her voice smooth as still water. Of course. Come by this afternoon. I should be free after 2. Perfect. See you then. He paused one beat too long. Elena. It really is a shame you're going. You've been good for this organization. Thank you, Nico. She hung up. The room was very quiet. He's going for the summit files, Dante said. He's going to try to access territorial documentation through her, Adrian said, and his voice was the coldest she had ever heard it. Through her access, before she's gone, before he has to explain why he needs them, he looked at Elena. He thinks you're leaving. He thinks this is his last window to use your clearance level without raising questions. Because my clearance is higher than his for certain classification tiers, she said. You never told him why. He's always assumed it was administrative. She set the phone down, carefully. He's coming at 2. He's coming at 2, Adrian confirmed. He stood, which gives us 4 hours to set up the conversation he's going to have when he gets here. He looked at her with the specific kind of intensity that meant something had shifted from planning into motion. You're going to meet with him. You're going to give him access to exactly what I tell you, to give him nothing more. And you're going to let him believe he's gotten what he came for. And then I'm going to know exactly what Bellini is looking for. He paused. And I'm going to know exactly how to make sure he never gets it. Elena nodded. One more thing, Dante said, standing. He looked between them. If Bellini sent someone to Elena yesterday, it means he's already running surveillance on this building. He's watching for signals. If Nico walks out of here this afternoon with what he thinks is summit intelligence, Bellini is going to move faster. Whatever his timeline was, it compresses. I know, Adrian said. We might have days, not weeks. I know. Adrian's jaw was tight. Which means I need to stop approaching this like a man with time and start approaching it like a man with none. He looked at Dante. Pull Caruso. I don't care what it takes. 20 years of bad blood doesn't matter anymore. If Bellini played us both with the same setup, Caruso is going to want to know. Dante blinked. You want to call the Carusos? I want to call them before Bellini realizes I'm calling them. There's a difference. He turned to Elena. How much of what you have is enough to take to the other families at the summit? She thought for a moment. The audio alone would be enough to establish Nico's involvement. The financial records establish the Bellini connection. What you don't have is proof of Bellini's specific plan going forward, what he intends to do at the summit, what position he's going to take. So I need Nico to talk, Adrian said. Or I do, she said. He looked at her. This afternoon, she said steadily. When he comes for the files, I can push him. I can make him think I know less than I do, that I'm just a secretary who noticed something slightly odd and is curious before she goes. People tell secretaries things they wouldn't tell equals because they don't think we'll understand what we're hearing. She held his gaze. I've been using that for 4 years. Let me use it one more time. The silence stretched. No, he said. Adrian, no flat. Absolute. Not alone with him. Not without someone in the room. He won't talk if someone is in the room. Then I'll be in my office with the door open and you'll be in yours and I will be close enough that if he even looks at you wrong. That's fine, she said. That's enough. I don't need you in the room. I need you close. He looked at her for a long, complicated moment. Close, he said finally. I'll be close. Nico Ferraro arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, with the easy confidence of someone who had spent decades operating just outside the line of scrutiny. He shook Elena's hand, with the warmth of someone who genuinely liked her, in the way people liked useful things, furniture they'd grown attached to. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn for 20 years. He had the unhurried manner of a man who believed he was executing a plan without friction. You look tired, he said pleasantly. Moving is exhausting. Are you all settled? Still packing, she said. Come in, sit down. I pulled the Q3 files. Do you want the full regional breakdown or just the boundary documentation? The boundary documentation should do it. He sat in her guest chair, the chair Adrian had been sitting in that morning, which struck her with a horrible irony she kept carefully off her face. You know, I could put in a word if you're looking for something after this. I know people. That's kind of you, she said, pulling a folder. You've been an asset here, Elena. More than people give you credit for. He accepted the folder and opened it, scanning with the quick efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Has Adrian been? How has he been taking it? The resignation. Quietly, she said. You know how he is, I do. Nico's eyes moved across the pages. He doesn't let things show. Doesn't mean he isn't feeling them. He looked up with the gentle smile of a mentor. You've been good for him, you know, as a stabilizing presence. I've tried to do my job well, she said. You have. He looked back at the folder. Turned a page. I noticed you updated the boundary coordinates for the Northern Territory. When did that happen? 2 weeks ago. They adjusted the line after the Bergen situation. He made a small sound that could have meant anything. And the eastern access points are those still under the old protocol. She met his eyes, the ones that go through the warehouse district. The ones that go through the warehouse district, he confirmed, with the same unhurried warmth. She handed him a second folder. He took it. He didn't immediately open it. He looked at her for a moment instead, with an expression that was still warm and was also, underneath the warmth, evaluating. Elena, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you leaving because you're scared? His voice was gentle. You've been here long enough that you understand what this organization. If something made you feel unsafe, if something happened that made you feel like the ground had shifted, that's something I'd want to know. As someone who cares about this family, she looked at him. He was asking if she knew something, wrapped in the performance of concern, padded with warmth, delivered with the practiced ease of a man who had been manipulating conversations for 40 years, but the core of it was a direct question. He was watching her. She let the silence breathe for one beat longer than was comfortable. Then she said, it's funny you'd say that. She tilted her head slightly, the way someone did when something had just occurred to them. A few months ago, this probably sounds paranoid, I thought I noticed something odd. In the Q2 wire transfers. A few small amounts that didn't match anything I could reconcile. Nico's expression didn't change. It was extraordinarily good, the not changing. But I went back and looked again, she said, and I think I was just tired. You know how you see patterns when you're overworked? She shook her head and smiled, self-deprecating. Probably just numbers moving the way numbers move. Probably, Nico said. I just mentioned it to myself at the time, made a note. I'm sure whoever handles the books after me will sort it out. She made a small, careless gesture. It's not my problem to solve anymore. 2 weeks and it's someone else's spreadsheet. Nico was very still. Of course, he said. Was there anything else you needed from the files? She asked brightly. No. He closed both folders and stood. This is everything. He smiled with perfect warmth. I hope the move goes smoothly, Elena. Montreal is beautiful in autumn. She hadn't told him Montreal. He was already walking to the door, and she kept her expression pleasantly neutral, and she didn't look toward Adrian's office until Nico had turned the dinner, and his footsteps had faded down the hallway. Then she looked. Adrian was standing in the open doorway of his office, very still, arms at his sides. He had heard. He walked to her desk, sat on the edge of it, not in the chair, on the desk itself, closer than he usually allowed himself to be, and looked at her with an expression that was completely unguarded for exactly 3 seconds before the professional veneer came back. He knows you didn't book Montreal through any company channel, Adrian said. He's been tracking me, she said. The passport, the ticket, he has someone watching. Bellini's people, she paused, and now he knows I noticed the wire transfers. Which means he's going to tell Bellini the variable isn't as clean as he thought. Which compresses the timeline further. Yes, he also knows, Adrian said quietly, that you've been here long enough and are careful enough that a loose end is exactly what you are. She understood what he meant. He's going to move to neutralize me before I'm on a plane. Within days, Adrian confirmed. She should have been frightened. She was, underneath everything she could feel it, a cold, steady current underneath the operational clarity. But the fear was manageable, in a way it hadn't been yesterday, in a way it hadn't been for months, and she understood the difference was the fact that she was no longer managing it alone. Then we need to move first, she said. Yes, he said. We do. He looked at her for a moment, with that particular quality of attention she was learning to stop, pretending she didn't notice. You did well. She had spent 5 years working for a man who was extraordinarily sparing with acknowledgement and who meant everything he said when he gave it. She had learned to value those moments the way you valued rain in a drought, briefly, fully, without letting yourself want more than you were going to get. He gave us the timeline, she said. That's what matters. He gave us more than the timeline. Adrian stood from the edge of the desk. He gave us confirmation that Bellini is personally invested in you specifically. That you're not a peripheral concern, you're a primary one. He met her eyes. Which tells me that what you heard 4 years ago is even more damaging than you knew. She had thought the same thing, sitting across from Nico, watching him work so hard to seem unconcerned about a secretary's small, offhand comment about wire transfers. He was terrified, she said, under all of that warmth. He was completely terrified. Because you hold the one thing that undoes all of it, Adrian said. Everything they've built, 20 years of patience. The summit, the plan, all of it falls apart if the right people hear 19 minutes and 40 seconds of audio. She looked up at him. Then let's make sure the right people hear it. He held her gaze, and for the first time since she'd walked into this building 12 hours ago with a letter she no longer believed in and a plan she was already abandoning, she saw something in his expression that looked like the very beginning of relief, the relief of a man who had been alone with his own defenses for a very long time and had just discovered that someone had been standing watch without being asked to. Together, he said. Together, she said. Outside the window, somewhere in the city, Marco Bellini was making phone calls she wasn't supposed to know about, adjusting a timeline she wasn't supposed to have access to, moving pieces on a board he thought he controlled. He didn't know yet that the woman he'd tried to scare out of New York hadn't run. He didn't know she'd stayed, and he didn't know that the man who'd told her to stay now held everything needed to take him apart. The call from Dante came at 11:17 at night. Elena was still at the office. She had stopped pretending she was going home at reasonable hours 3 days ago, when the situation had compressed from weeks into days and the days had started feeling like hours. She was cross-referencing Nico's calendar against the financial transfer records when her phone buzzed, and Dante's name on the screen made something in her chest tighten immediately because Dante didn't call after 10 unless something had moved. They took her, Dante said, before she could speak. She went very still. Who? Bellini's people. 20 minutes ago. His voice was controlled in the way of someone managing their own adrenaline with significant effort. It wasn't you, Elena. They went for someone else. A pause that landed like a stone in still water. They took Sophia Moretti, Adrian's younger sister. 28 years old, lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn, stayed carefully outside the organization's operations, taught art at a community college, and was the one person in Adrian Moretti's life that everyone knew he would burn the world down for. Elena was already on her feet. Where is Adrian? On his way up. Elena, Dante stopped. He got the call 30 seconds before I did. He's not in a good place. I need you to be ready for that. She understood what Dante wasn't saying. Adrian Moretti, not in a good place, was a very specific and very dangerous thing. I'll be ready. She hung up and walked to his office and stood in the middle of it and waited. She didn't have to wait long. He came through the door, the way weather came through, fast, contained, and full of something that was looking for a place to break. He stopped when he saw her, and the specific violence of the emotion moving through him was visible in every line of his body, even as his face worked to flatten it. You heard, he said. Dante called, Sophia. He said her name like something he was trying to hold on to, and it was slipping. She was leaving her building. They had 3 men. He stopped. He pressed his hand flat on his desk and stood there for a moment, not speaking, doing the work of getting himself from the raw edge of something back to the functional center of himself. They called me 40 seconds after it happened. Bellini himself. He wants a meeting. What kind of meeting? The kind where I come alone, and I agree to surrender operational control of the Moretti territories at the summit, in exchange for Sophia coming home. He looked up. His eyes were controlled and devastated in equal measure. He said, I have 24 hours. She crossed the room and stood in front of him, not reaching for him, not crowding him, just close enough to be fully present in a way that could be misread as distance. What do you want to do? He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not uncertainty. Adrian Moretti didn't do uncertainty. This was something rawer. The look of a man whose every decision had always been made from a position of calculated power, finding himself on ground that was entirely unmapped. What I want to do, he said quietly, and what I should do are not the same thing. Tell me what you want to do. I want to find Bellini and tear his organization apart with my bare hands. He said it without heat, without drama, with the flat factual delivery of someone describing something they genuinely intended. And then I want to get my sister home. And what you should do. Accept the meeting. play for time, use the information we have to coordinate with the Carusos, and move on Bellini's operation before the summit. He held her gaze. Give his people no reason to hurt Sophia in the interim. That's the right call, she said. I know it's the right call. His jaw was tight. I've been making right calls my entire career. I've been making the strategic choice, and the logical choice, and the defensible choice for 20 years, and I'm standing here telling you that there is not a single part of me that wants to make the right call tonight. She looked at him steadily. But you will. He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, not resolution exactly, but the thing that came just before resolution, the last hard push against something inevitable. I will, he said, because Sophia would never forgive me if I didn't. Neither would I, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It was out before the decision to say it had fully formed, and she felt it land between them with the particular weight of something that couldn't be taken back. He looked at her. Then, let's move, he said. The next 6 hours were the most concentrated work Elena had ever done in her professional life, and her professional life had not been short of concentrated effort. Dante pulled Caruso, not through intermediaries, not through channels directly. A phone call between two men who had spent 15 years treating each other as enemies and spent 40 minutes on this particular call, finding out they'd been manipulated by the same architect into a conflict that had benefited neither of them. She sat 2 chairs away from Adrian and listened to his side of the conversation and watched the controlled precision of a man who was operating at the absolute top of his capacity under conditions designed to break him. Marcus Caruso, as it turned out, did not need much convincing. He played us both at the Caruso dinner, Dante told Elena quietly, while Adrian wrapped the call. Caruso lost 2 men that night. He's been waiting 15 years for someone to explain why. Finding out it was Bellini with Nico as the mechanism, Dante paused. He said, and I'm quoting, "I will bring everything I have." How much is that? Enough. Dante looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating many things simultaneously. You know, if you'd come to us with the audio 4 years ago, even just to me. 4 years ago, I didn't know who I could trust in this organization, she said simply. I still don't know the full reach of it. Nico has been here for 22 years. He knows everyone. He's been a source of information for them the entire time. Any chain I used to deliver the information could have had a link that led back to him. Dante nodded slowly. So you built a vault instead? I built a vault, she said. I kept the door locked, and I carried the key, and I waited until I understood who I could give it to. Adrian. He was always going to be the one, she said. I just needed to be certain the timing wouldn't get him killed. Dante looked at her for a long moment. He's not going to let you leave, you know. After all of this, whether or not it's the right thing to say, I'm telling you as someone who has known him for 20 years. Whatever arrangement you two had before yesterday, it's over. He's not going to be able to go back to what it was. She said nothing. That doesn't scare you? Dante asked. She looked across the room at Adrian, still on the phone, still working with everything he had, still carrying more than any one person was built to carry, without showing how heavy it was. It scares me precisely the right amount, she said. At 4 a.m, Adrian called the meeting with Bellini. He relayed the acceptance through the channel. Bellini had provided a number that Dante's people had already been working on tracing the moment it appeared. The meeting was set for 6 p.m. A restaurant in Midtown that Bellini owned through 3 layers of legitimate company structure. Neutral ground in the way that ground owned by one party was never actually neutral. Elena was doing a final cross-reference on the territorial documentation when Adrian appeared in her doorway. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I'm serious, Elena. So am I, she looked up. If you're awake, I'm awake. That's not negotiable. He looked at her with the expression she was starting to be able to read, the one that was equal parts frustration and something he hadn't yet named to himself. He came in and sat in the guest chair, always the guest chair now, always across from her rather than above her, and he leaned back and looked at the ceiling in the way of a man giving himself permission to stop performing capability for 30 seconds. Tell me something, he said to the ceiling. That has nothing to do with Nico or Bellini or any of this. She thought about it. The first week I worked for you, you had a meeting cancel at the last minute, and you spent the free hour reading a mystery novel you kept in your bottom desk drawer. You think no one saw? I saw. He lowered his head and looked at her. What was it? Agatha Christie. I could only see spine. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but the infrastructure of one, the thing that came before a smile in a face that didn't smile easily. I read 3 of them that month. Don't tell Dante. I've known for 5 years and said nothing. That's very diplomatic of you. It's what you pay me for, among other things, he said. He held her gaze, among significantly other things, as it turns out. The quiet between them settled differently than it used to. It had always been a professional quiet of the comfortable absence of unnecessary words between 2 people who understood efficiency. Now it was layered, full of things neither of them had gotten around to naming yet, not because the names didn't exist, but because the timing had been consistently wrong, and the stakes had been consistently too high, and they were both, in their respective ways, people who moved carefully toward anything that mattered. After this is over, he said quietly. Let's get through it first, she said. I know. He stopped. He pressed his hand over his eyes for a moment and then lowered it, and he looked at her with the full, unfiltered weight of something he'd apparently decided he was done managing carefully. I need you to know that the reason I came after you when you resigned, the reason I stood at your desk and told you you were staying. Adrian, it wasn't operational, he said. I told myself it was. I told Dante it was. I have been telling myself many things about why I pay particular attention to you, about why you're 12 minutes late at lunch, registered before anything else did that day, about why I know which side of your own office you stand on when you're trying to create distance. He paused. It wasn't operational. She looked at him. I know, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. You knew I suspected, she said carefully. And then I knew. And then I stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it wasn't a direction I could afford to go, given everything I was carrying. And now it's almost 5 in the morning, she said. And Chester is somewhere in this city with people who are willing to hurt her to get to you. And tonight you're walking into a room with the man who's been trying to dismantle everything you've built for 15 years. She held his gaze. Let's get Sophia home. Let's end this. And then she stopped. And then he said, it wasn't a question, it was an agreement. The hours between dawn and the 6 o'clock meeting moved the way time moved under extreme pressure, both too fast and with a terrible slowness, each minute carrying the weight of everything hanging on it. At noon, Nico Ferraro didn't show up to the office. Dante reported it at 12:15. By 12:30, they had confirmation that Nico's phone was offline, and his car was gone from the building's garage. He'd run, which meant Bellini knew something had shifted, knew Nico had been identified, knew the meeting tonight was no longer the surrender he'd planned for. He's going to bring more people, Dante said. I know, Adrian said. This changes the meeting. It changes the parameters. Not the objective, Adrian looked at Dante. Is Caruso in position? His people have had eyes on the restaurant since this morning. We know every entrance, every exit, every car in the surrounding 4 blocks. Dante paused. Adrian, Sophia, his people haven't been able to locate the holding location. We know she's in the city. We don't know where. The silence was terrible. Bellini will have her somewhere, Adrian said. Somewhere close enough to use as leverage at the meeting, but not close enough to risk. He'll want her accessible. He thought for a moment. Nico knew everything about this organization. He would have given Bellini locations. Properties. Places off the official record. We're looking. Look harder. He turned. Elena was already at her desk, already ahead of him. She had pulled up a property database that she had been quietly maintaining for 3 years, every Moretti-adjacent property, every holding company, every address that had appeared in documents she'd processed and had quietly cataloged in the back of her mind. There's a property in Red Hook, she said, without looking up. Purchased 8 years ago through a holding company that officially belongs to the Moretti organization but hasn't appeared in any active operational documentation in 4 years. I flagged it once when the utility bills went up. I never found an explanation. She looked up. It's been drawing power consistently for the past 6 months. Dante grabbed his phone. Don't move on it yet, Adrian said immediately. Not until we're in that meeting. If Bellini's gets word his holding location is compromised before we're in position. He panics, Elena said. He does something we can't predict, Adrian said. We hold, we get into the meeting, we pin him in public. We use the recording and the financial records to remove any fiction that he has operational leverage. Caruso backs our position, and while he's contained, we move on Red Hook. That's a lot of things happening simultaneously, Dante said. Yes, Adrian said. It is. He looked at Elena. The recording I wanted heard tonight. In that room. I can have it ready, she said. At the meeting, he said. In front of Bellini, she understood what he was asking. He wasn't just asking about the audio. He was asking about her, whether she was willing to sit in a room with Marco Bellini and be visibly part of the takedown. Whether she was willing to stop being invisible. Yes, she said. I'll be there. His jaw tightened. Elena, I'll be there, she said again. Don't argue. He looked at her for a long moment, working through the things she could see him, working through the tension between wanting her close and wanting her safe. The two impulses pulling in directions that the situation refused to allow to be simultaneously honored. Close to me, he said finally, the entire time. Close to you, she agreed. The restaurant was quiet when they arrived at 5:45. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that had been created deliberately cleared tables, locked front door, the absence of the ordinary hum of a functioning public space, replaced by the specific, pressurized silence of men who were carrying weapons and waiting. Bellini was already there. Marco Bellini was 63 years old, compact, silver-haired, with the kind of face that inspired confidence in people who didn't know what they were looking at. He had the warmth of a grandfather and the eyes of someone who had been making cold calculations since before Adrian Moretti was born. He had 4 men arranged at discrete distances, close enough to function as a statement, far enough to project the performance of good faith. He looked at Elena when they walked in, not at Adrian. At her, Miss Rossi, he said pleasantly, I'm glad you're still in the city. I decided to postpone my travel, she said. Wise, he gestured at the table. Sit, please, both of you. They sat. Dante remained standing 3 feet behind Adrian's right shoulder. 2 of Bellini's men mirrored the positioning. The architecture of it was perfectly calibrated, each party demonstrating force while maintaining the fiction of negotiation. I'll be brief, Bellini said. I want the northern and eastern territories at the summit, acknowledged and formalized by the other families. I want operational autonomy in the port district, and I want a structured withdrawal of Moretti influence from the financial sector contacts you've cultivated in the last decade. He folded his hands. In exchange, Sofia Moretti goes home tonight, unharmed. With my personal apologies for the inconvenience. Adrian looked at him across the table. That's a significant offer, Adrian said. It's a fair offer, given the circumstances being that you have my sister. The circumstances being that the alternative is significantly worse for everyone. Bellini smiled. Adrian, I've been building toward this for 15 years. I have patience. I have resources. I have, until very recently, a man inside your organization who has given me operational intelligence that would take you years to counter. He paused. I'm giving you a clean exit. That's generous. Nico ran this morning, Adrian said. Something moved through Bellini's composure, not surprise exactly. A recalibration, I know, which tells me you knew last night that the position had shifted. Adrian leaned back. You brought Sofia in before Nico disappeared, which means you were hedging. Which means you weren't certain your operational intelligence was as clean as you thought. Bellini looked at him evenly. Moretti, you have a man approach a woman in a diner, Adrian said, his voice dropping to something conversational and absolutely cold, and tell her to leave quietly. She doesn't leave. That concerns you. You're not sure what she has, but you know she has something, because Nico told you 4 years ago that there'd been a witness to a phone call he shouldn't have made. He paused. He just didn't know who the witness was, neither did you. The room was very still. You wanted her gone because you didn't know what she knew, Adrian continued. And when she didn't go, you took Sofia to give yourself leverage over me while you figured out the exposure. He tilted his head slightly. The problem is that you're still operating on the assumption that your position is stronger than mine. And it isn't. You're bluffing, Bellini said. Elena, Adrian said. She opened her laptop. She hit play. Nico Ferraro's voice filled the room, warm, unhurried, absolutely damning. 19 minutes and 40 seconds of a man who had been trusted for 22 years methodically describing the mechanics of a betrayal he'd been building for at least a decade, speaking to a contact he identified twice as Bellini. detailing the framework of the Caruso setup with the easy fluency of someone reviewing a plan they were proud of. She watched Bellini's face. She had imagined this moment many times over 4 years. She had not imagined it would look like this, not the explosive response she'd braced for, but the quiet, terrible compression of a man watching something he'd spent years constructing come apart in real time, and understanding there was nothing he could do to stop it. At the 2-minute mark, one of Bellini's men shifted. Dante's hand moved. The man went still again. At the 11-minute mark, Bellini looked at Elena directly. "Where did you get that?" "I was working late," she said. 4 years ago, I had my phone in my hand. Nico said there was no one. "Nico didn't look," she said. "I was in the file room." He walked past the door. He never considered that the secretary might still be there, because the secretary didn't matter. She held his gaze. She never mattered to anyone in that conversation. That's why she was safe to leave in the hall. Bellini looked at her for a long, still moment. And then he looked at Adrian, and for the first time in what Elena suspected was 15 years, Marco Bellini looked at a problem he hadn't planned for. "The financial records corroborate the transfers referenced in the recording," Adrian said. "We have 3 years of documentation. We also have, as of this morning, the full cooperation of Marcus Caruso, who is very interested in the details of what happened the night his men were killed." He paused. "At the summit next week, every family in the Northeast is going to hear 19 minutes and 40 seconds of audio and 3 years of financial evidence. You will walk out of that room with nothing, no territory, no alliances, no position." He leaned forward slightly. "Or you tell me where Sofia is right now. You call off every person you have positioned in this city, and you withdraw from the summit entirely. Quietly, without explanation. And I don't take what Elena has been carrying for 4 years and use it to finish you completely." The silence stretched. "You're giving me an exit," Bellini said. "I'm giving Sofia an exit," Adrian said. "You're incidental." Another long silence. Bellini looked at his hands. He looked at Elena. He looked at the laptop, where the recording had finished and the room was entirely quiet. Then he took out his phone and made a call. He said 3 words into it that Elena didn't catch, and then he set the phone face down on the table. "Red Hook," he said. "The property on Van Brunt. She's with 2 men. They've been told to stand down." His voice was flat, emptied, the voice of a man who had just watched 15 years dissolve in under an hour. She wasn't harmed. Dante was already moving. His phone was at his ear before he cleared the door. Elena exhaled, not dramatically, not with the release of someone who had been holding their breath for a scene. Quietly, almost privately, the way she exhaled everything. The way she'd been exhaling things for 4 years without anyone noticing. Adrian noticed. He looked at her across the table, in the brief window, before the room reshuffled itself around the new reality, before the calls were completed and the logistics descended and the next 100 moving pieces required his attention. He looked at her with the full, unguarded weight of what the last 72 hours had been, and what she had been in them, and what she had been carrying for the 48 months before that. "You okay?" he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. "I will be," she said. Same answer as Dante's question. Different weight on it now. He nodded once, then the room folded back in, around them, and his phone rang, and Dante's voice came from the doorway, saying they had visual on the Red Hook property, and the operational machine that was Adrian Moretti's world reasserted itself in every direction at once. But she held on to the look he'd given her. She held on to it the way she'd learned to hold on to small, true things when the large, complicated things were too loud to hear clearly. Sofia Moretti was home by 9 o'clock. Elena wasn't there, for she was back at the office, running the final documentation that would accompany the audio recording to the summit, making sure every thread was traceable and every connection was airtight. She heard about it from Dante, who called her from the car. "She's fine." Shaken but fine, she asked Adrian if he was okay before she asked anything else. He didn't answer, he just held on. Elena sat with that for a moment. Then she went back to work. He found her at 11. He looked exhausted in the way people looked after the adrenaline burned off, and the body remembered it had been running at maximum capacity for 3 straight days. He sat on the edge of her desk, his spot now. She thought, and he didn't say anything for a moment. He just sat. "Sofia," she asked, "sleeping. Dante has people on the building." He paused. She told me to thank you. Elena looked up. She doesn't know me. I told her what you'd been carrying, he said. What you'd done. He met her eyes. She said, and I'm quoting, "She sounds like someone who should have been in this family a long time ago." Elena didn't know what to do with that. She looked at her hands. She's not wrong, Adrian said quietly. Adrian. I'm not making a declaration, he said. I'm not. It's late, and we're both running on nothing, and I'm not going to say the important things when we're like this. He paused. I'm just telling you that my sister, who is the person I trust most in the world to accurately read a situation, said you sounded like family. And I agree with her. She looked up at him. He looked back. Go home, he said. Sleep. The summit documentation can wait until morning, and if it can't, it will tell me so, and I'll deal with it. He stood. And Elena, tomorrow, when we're rested and this is over, and the world looks like itself again, I need to say things to you that I should have said a long time ago. How long ago? She asked. He thought about it. 3 years, 7 months, he said. Give or take. She held his gaze. That's oddly specific. I pay attention, he said. I told you that. He walked to the door. Adrian, she said. He stopped. She had been careful for 5 years. She had been precise and professional and appropriate in every dimension. And she had carried enormous things alone in the service of that carefulness. And she was tired. Not permanently tired. The other kind, the kind that made you finally stop calculating and say the thing. I know why I didn't go to Montreal, she said. It wasn't the evidence. It wasn't Bellini, it wasn't the summit. He turned. I stayed, she said, because leaving meant not coming back. And I wasn't ready to not come back. She held his gaze across the room. I still had things here that mattered more than safe. He looked at her for a long moment in the quiet of the office, the city moving far below them, everything that had just happened, still settling into its new shape around them both. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud. Once. He nodded. Get some sleep, he said. But his voice when he said it was different from any version of those 3 words she'd heard from him before. It was the voice of a man who had just received something he was going to carry carefully. She watched him go. She sat in the quiet, and for the first time in 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days, the thing she'd been holding alone, finally fully, completely let go. The summit happened on a Thursday. Elena wasn't there. That had been the agreement, not Adrian's unilateral decision, which was what it would have been 3 weeks ago, but an actual agreement between 2 people who had learned in the hardest possible way that decisions made alone tended to cost more than necessary. She had laid out the reasoning herself. Her presence at the summit would signal to the other families that Adrian had a vulnerability. A person he'd visibly moved to protect. In a room full of men who traded in leverage, handing them that information before the power structure had been redrawn was operationally reckless. Adrian had listened. He'd pushed back once, I don't like you being somewhere I can't see you, and she'd looked at him with the specific patience of someone who had learned to hold her ground without raising her voice, and she'd said, I know. Do it anyway. And he had, because he was a man who was learning slowly, imperfectly, with the particular resistance of someone who had spent 40 years doing things, one way that trust was not the same as control, and that people who were worth keeping were worth trusting. She sat in her office and worked and waited, and Dante sent her updates every 40 minutes like clockwork, which she suspected was Adrian's doing without Adrian's fingerprints on it. The recording played at 2 in the afternoon. Dante's text said, room went quiet. Caruso backed everything. 2 families asked for copies. One tried to leave. Caruso's people suggested he stay. At 3:15, Bellini's territory is formally under discussion for redistribution. His name is finished in this room. At 4:40, done. Coming back, she set her phone down and stared at the ceiling and let herself feel the full, enormous weight of what done meant. 4 years of careful carrying, 19 minutes and 40 seconds of audio that she had listened to so many times she could recite it in her sleep. 3 years of financial records assembled in increments, small enough not to trigger attention. The storage unit in Queens, the passport photo with the new hair, the one-way ticket to Montreal she'd never used. All of it finished. She had expected to feel lighter. She did feel lighter. But underneath the lightness was something she hadn't anticipated, a strange, vertiginous quality, like a person who had been bracing against a wall for so long that when the wall was finally removed, they didn't immediately know how to stand without it. She was still sitting with that feeling when she heard his footsteps in the hall. She knew them. She had always known them. But they sounded different tonight, less loaded, she thought, or loaded differently. The weight they carried was a different shape than it had been, for as long as she'd been listening. He came through the door and stopped when he saw her still at desk, and the look on his face was the most unguarded she'd ever seen on him, which was saying something given the last 72 hours. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said, Dante. "Of course." He came in and sat guest chair, across from her, always across, and he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees in the posture of a man who had just put down something very heavy and was taking stock of his own hands. "Bellini is finished. The territory redistribution will take months to formalize, but the other families made their position clear. His network in this city is effectively dissolved." He paused. "Nico turned up in Philadelphia this morning. He's being handled." "Handled how?" "Quietly." He met her eyes. "Nobody is going to find him doing anything he shouldn't be doing ever again." "That's as specific as I'll be." She nodded. She had learned long ago where her need for details ended and where the nature of his world required her to simply trust the outcome. "The families want to know who compiled the financial documentation," he said. She looked at him. "What did you tell them?" "I told them it was an internal resource." He held her gaze. They pressed. "I told them it was someone who had been protecting this organization from the inside for 4 years, and that her name was her own business." He paused. "Marcus Caruso said whoever she was either very brave or very foolish." "I told him she was neither. I told him she was very good at her job." Something moved in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me for telling the truth." He looked at her steadily. "There are things I need to say to you. I told you last night that I'd say them when this was over and we were rested. It's over. I don't know that either of us is rested, but I'm not willing to wait anymore." She set her pen down. "Okay," she said. He was quiet for a moment, and she understood that he was choosing words the way he chose everything deliberately, with full awareness of their weight. Adrian Moretti did not speak carelessly. When he spoke precisely about something personal, it cost him more than it would cost most people, because he had built an entire identity around the strategic management of what he revealed and what he kept contained. "I told you 3 years and 7 months ago," he said. "The day you handled the DeLuca situation. You remember that?" She did. A negotiation that had gone badly sideways at the last minute, documents missing, timeline collapsed, 2 parties threatening to walk. She had rebuilt it from the ground up in 4 hours, without telling anyone what she was doing until it was done. "You came into my office, and you put the signed contracts on my desk, and you said, 'The DeLuca situation has been resolved,' and then you walked out," he said. "And I sat there, and I looked at those contracts, and I thought he stopped. Started again. I thought, she is the most capable person in this building, and she doesn't know it, and she's never going to let herself know it, because she's too busy making sure everyone else doesn't notice her. And then I thought something else that I decided immediately I was not going to act on." "What did you think?" "That I didn't want her to not know it anymore." He held her gaze. "That I was tired of being the only person in the room who understood exactly what she was worth. That I wanted to be the person who told her, regularly. For a significant amount of time." He paused. "And then I decided that was an extraordinarily complicated thought to have about my personal secretary, and I put it in the same drawer as the Agatha Christie novels, and I left it there." She looked at him across the desk. 3 years and 7 months, she said. "Give or take," he said. Adrian. She said his name the way she'd been saying it, since he'd asked her to not Mr. Moretti, not the professional distance of a title, just his name, and the simplicity of it still did something she hadn't gotten used to. "I want to ask you something. Ask. If none of this had happened," she said. "If I hadn't resigned, if Bellini hadn't moved, if it had just been another ordinary week, would you ever have opened that drawer?" He was quiet for a moment, honest quiet, not evasive quiet. She'd learned the difference. "No," he said. "I don't think I would have." "Why? Because I was afraid," he said. "And I'm not someone who admits that easily, so understand that I'm telling you this because I think you've earned the unedited version." He looked at her steadily. I have spent my entire adult life in a world where caring about someone is a liability, where every person who matters to you is a target, where love, and I'm using that word deliberately because I think we're past careful language, where love is the thing your enemies use against you. His voice was level, but she could hear what was underneath it. I looked at you for 3 years and 7 months, and I saw someone who mattered to me in a way that had nothing to do with operational utility, and my immediate instinct was to put distance between us. Because the closer you were to me, the more I let you matter, the more dangerous your world became. She understood it completely. She understood it in the specific, visceral way of someone who had made the same calculation from the other side, who had spent 4 years protecting him from the knowledge that she had information that made her a target, partly to protect the organization, and partly because keeping the secret meant keeping the distance, and keeping the distance meant she didn't have to look at what she'd feel if she closed it. We were both doing the same thing, she said. We were both doing the same thing, he confirmed. From opposite sides of a desk, the quiet between them settled warm and complicated. I'm not going to Montreal, she said. I know. I'm not going anywhere. I know that too. Something moved across his face, not quite relief. Something older and more complicated than relief. The expression of a man setting down a fear he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing its weight. I want to talk about what that means, what it looks like going forward. He paused. What you want it to look like. What I want, she said slowly, as if testing the phrase. You have a say in this, he said. I need you to understand that. Whatever we build from here, you have equal say. I am very aware that I am a man who defaults to control, and I am equally aware that you are not a woman who tolerates being controlled, and I think those two things are going to require ongoing negotiation. The corner of his mouth moved the near smile she'd catalogued 100 times and never mentioned. I'm telling you up front that I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. I want you to tell me when I do. I will, she said. Loudly, I'm counting on it. She looked at him across the desk, this man she had spent 5 years organizing her professional life around, whom she had protected from a truth that could have destroyed him, whom she had stayed for, when staying was the most dangerous option, and leaving was the most rational one. She looked at him, and she felt the full, uncomplicated weight of what she felt for him, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't immediately calculate the risk of feeling it. Come around the desk, she said. He looked at her. Stop sitting across from me in the guest chair, she said. You've been doing it for 3 days. Come around the desk. He stood. He walked around the desk and sat on the edge of it, close, genuinely close, not the managed distance of a professional context, and he looked down at her with an expression she was fairly certain no one else in the world had ever seen on his face. Hi, she said. Hi, he said, and then he reached down and took her hand, just that, nothing dramatic, nothing performed, just his hand over hers on her desk in her office, at the end of the most exhausting week of both their lives. And the simplicity of it hit her harder than anything else that had happened in the last 72 hours. We're going to figure this out, he said. We are, she said. It's not going to be easy. I've been managing complicated things for 5 years, she said. I think I can manage this. I was going to say the same thing. She almost laughed. Not quite, she was too tired and the moment was too full, but almost. The week that followed was in its own way harder than the crisis. Crises had a particular mercy to them. They compressed everything down to the operational, the immediate, the survivable. You didn't have time to feel things during a crisis, because feeling things was a luxury the timeline refused. But the week after, when the immediate danger had resolved and the structural rebuilding was underway, and the days stopped feeling like countdowns, everything that the crisis had temporarily suspended came back at full volume. Adrian pushed her away on a Tuesday, not dramatically. Not with cruelty. In the way that people who were afraid of the thing they most wanted sometimes pushed through the mechanics of distance, through the sudden reappearance of professional formality, through the careful management of what he said and how close he stood and the way he stopped coming around the desk. She noticed it Monday evening. By Tuesday afternoon, she was certain. By Wednesday morning, she'd had enough. She walked into his office without knocking, which she had never done in 5 years, and she closed the door behind her and stood in front of it and said, "No." He looked up from his computer. "Excuse me? No," she said again. Whatever you're doing, whatever conversation you're having with yourself about why this is too complicated, or why I'd be safer without you, or why the right thing to do is rebuild the distance, no. She held his gaze. I've been watching you do it for 3 days, and I'm done watching. His expression was carefully neutral. She'd stopped being fooled by that. Elena, you told me you were going to get it wrong sometimes, and that I should tell you when you did, she said. You're getting it wrong. I'm telling you. A silence. Then I'm trying to protect you. From what? From this. He gestured not at the room, at everything the room represented. From what my world is, from what it costs the people who are close to me. His jaw was tight. Sophia spent a night in a room in Red Hook because she's my sister. Because Bellini knew that taking her was the fastest way to get to me. I am not willing to stop, she said. Look at me. He looked at her. Sophia was taken because Bellini was a man with a 15-year plan and a traitor inside your organization, she said. Not because she mattered to you. She would have been a target regardless. That's what people like Bellini do. They find the pressure points that exist. They don't create them. She walked to his desk and put both hands on it and leaned forward. And I am not Sophia. I am not someone who exists outside your world, who needs to be protected from the edges of it. I have been inside your world for 5 years. I know every dangerous thing about it, and I chose to stay anyway. She held his gaze. I chose to stay for you. Don't make that choice meaningless by pushing me out after the fact. His expression cracked. Not dramatically a hairline fracture, the kind only visible to someone who had spent 5 years learning to read what his face did when he was feeling something he hadn't budgeted for. But it was there, and she saw it, and she didn't look away. I don't know how to do this, he said. I want to be clear about that. I don't mean the feeling. I understand the feeling. I mean the daily mechanics of it, of having someone, of letting someone have me. He looked at her with the full, difficult honesty of a man who was very good at almost everything and had found the one domain where competence had never been an option. I've been alone by design for a very long time. I made that choice deliberately. And now I'm standing here trying to undo 20 years of deliberate aloneness, and I keep defaulting to the instincts that kept me safe when aloneness was the goal, and I know that's wrong, and I don't know how to stop. She straightened. She came around to his side of the desk because she had learned in the last week that distance was the enemy and presence was the only language that worked with him, and she stood beside him, not in front of him, not across from him. And she said, "You stop by telling me when it's happening. The way you just did." He looked at her sideways. "That's it?" "That's a lot," she said. "You just told me what was happening inside you in real time, without me having to pull it out of you, and without you repackaging it as something less than what it was. Do you understand how significant that is, for you specifically?" Something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been, under different lighting, the very beginning of something like peace. "I suppose it is," he said. "Talk to me," she said simply. "When it gets complicated, when you default to distance, when you're having the conversation in your head about why protecting me means losing me, talk to me instead of the inside of your own skull." She looked at him. "I'm very good at complicated. I've been doing it for years. Let me help with yours." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, for the second time deliberate again, unhurried, and held it the way you held something you were no longer willing to put down. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Sophia Moretti arrived at the office on a Friday afternoon, unannounced, and walked past Elena's desk with the confidence of someone who had grown up in buildings exactly like this one and considered the concept of reception a suggestion rather than a requirement. She was striking, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, with Adrian's bone structure and a warmth in her expression that Adrian kept more carefully rationed. She stopped at Elena's desk and looked at her with the frank, unfiltered assessment of someone who had heard a great deal about a person and was now measuring the reality against the description. "You're Elena," she said. "I am," Elena said. "I'm Sophia." She sat down in the guest chair without being invited, which Elena suspected was a Moretti family trait. "I wanted to meet you before Adrian decided to manage this introduction the way he manages everything, which is to say carefully, at a time of his choosing, with approximately 4 contingency plans." Elena found herself almost smiling. He does manage things carefully. He manages everything carefully except the things he actually cares about, which he either ignores entirely or holds on to for dear life with no middle ground. Sophia looked at her with clear, direct eyes. He held on to you. He told me I was staying, Elena said. There's an argument that's not the same thing. He's my brother, Sophia said. I know the difference between him telling someone they're staying, because it's operationally convenient, and him telling someone they're staying, because the alternative is something he can't look at directly. She tilted her head. He told you you're staying because the second one was true, and he didn't know how else to say it. Elena looked at her. He's better than he seems, Sophia said. On the inside, where nobody usually gets to look, she paused. You've been looking for 5 years. I have. Then you already know. I already know, Elena agreed. Sophia nodded, satisfied, in the way of someone who had come to confirm a thing she already suspected and had confirmed it. She stood. He's going to drive you insane sometimes. The control thing is real, and it's deeply ingrained, and even when he knows it's wrong, his instinct is always going to be to build a wall and call it protection. She looked at Elena steadily. But he listens. When someone he respects tells him he's wrong, he actually listens. That's rarer than it sounds. I know, Elena said. I've seen it. Good. Sophia turned toward his office. I'm gonna go yell at him about not calling me for 3 days. You should stay for that. It'll be educational. She disappeared through the glass door. Elena heard. 30 seconds later, Sophia's voice and Adrian's voice engaged in what sounded like a very sincere argument, conducted entirely with affection. And she sat back in her chair and looked at her desk and thought about 5 years and 1 week and all the distance between who she'd been at the beginning of both and who she was right now. She thought about the thumb drive, the storage unit, the one-way ticket, the passport with the new hair. She thought about the 12 minutes in a diner, and a man who had known she was late before she'd said a word, and a resignation letter in a jacket pocket that had never been returned to her. She thought about what Dante had said on the phone. He's not going to let you leave. Whatever arrangement you two had before, it's over. She thought about what she'd said to Adrian in this office. Late, when she was finally too tired to be careful, I still had things here that mattered more than safe. The door opened. Adrian leaned out. Sophia wants to know if you'll have dinner with us, he said. His expression was the particular combination of exasperated and content that his sister apparently produced in him without effort. She says she's inviting you, directly, because she doesn't trust me to do it in a timely manner. She's not wrong, Elena said. She is never wrong, and it is a significant ongoing problem. He held the door. Will you? She looked at him, at the door he was holding open. At the office she had spent 5 years in, which looked different now, not because anything in it changed, but because she was standing in it differently, as someone who was choosing to be here rather than someone who had reasoned her way into staying. Yes, she said. I will. She got up and walked through the door he was holding, and he fell into step beside her, not in front, not directing beside her, which was new and deliberate and exactly right. She's already called a restaurant, he said. Of course she has. She booked it under Moretti, party of 3. Elena looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, but the near smile was there, the one that lived in the corner of his expression and only came out when he'd stopped working at looking composed. Party of 3, she said. She's efficient, he said. It's a family trait, I've noticed. They walked down the hallway together, the hallway she'd walked alone 1,000 times, in both directions, toward a dozen different versions of difficulty, and the city was loud outside, and the evening was beginning, and somewhere ahead of them, Sophia Moretti was already at a restaurant, being absolutely certain about things with the confidence of someone who had grown up watching her brother make every decision except the important ones. Behind them, the office sat quiet. The guest chair was on the wrong side of the desk. She'd fix it tomorrow. Or she wouldn't. Some things, she was learning, were worth leaving exactly where they'd ended up. 3 weeks after the summit, Dante appeared in Adrian's office with paperwork and an expression that said the paperwork was either very good news or very complicated news, and he hadn't yet decided which. It was both. The legitimate side of the Moretti organization, the financial holdings, the property portfolio. The business infrastructure that had been growing in parallel with the other side of things for 15 years had been expanding faster than anyone had formally managed since the person previously responsible for managing it had been quietly and permanently removed from his position. Nico Ferraro had, among his many other functions, served as the nominal operational head of the legitimate business arm. We need someone who understands every account, every property, every company structure, and every financial thread in the legitimate operation, Dante said. Someone who has been watching it for years and knows where the inconsistencies are and can rebuild the management structure from the inside out. Adrian looked at him. "I'm not suggesting anything," Dante said, in the tone of a man who was absolutely suggesting something. "You're suggesting Elena," Adrian said. "I'm observing that Elena has, by her own description, been tracking the financial documentation for this organization for 3 years. That she identified Nico's discrepancies. That she built a 3-year forensic financial record from memory and instinct. That she has a professional background that most people in this building have never bothered to look at closely." He set the paperwork on the desk. "I'm also observing that she has a 2-week notice outstanding that technically has never been formally withdrawn." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "She needs to be asked," he said. "Not told, asked." "I know that," Dante said. "She decides what this looks like. The title, the scope, all of it. I know that too. And this is a conversation I'm having with her, not one you're engineering." "Absolutely," Dante said, in the tone of a man who had already engineered it as much as he intended to and was now gracefully stepping back. "I'll be in my office." He left. Adrian sat with the paperwork for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the glass door, and knocked on the frame of Elena's office, which he had also never done before, and which made her look up with the particular expression of someone noticing a significant behavioral change in a person she'd studied for 5 years. "Can I come in?" he said. She stared at him. "You've never knocked." "I'm making adjustments." He came in and sat in the guest chair, which was back on the correct side of the desk, because she had fixed it. "I want to talk to you about something, and I want to be clear before I start that this is a question, not a direction." "I'm listening," she said. He put the paperwork on her desk. She looked at it. She looked at him. "The legitimate arm of this organization needs someone to run it," he said. "Not manage it from a distance, run it. Full operational authority over the business structure, the accounts, the property portfolio. The title would be Executive Director of Moretti Holdings." He held her gaze. "It's a significant position. It's work you've already been doing informally for 3 years. And it's entirely separate from anything else between us. This isn't about that. This is about the fact that you are the most qualified person I know for this specific role, and I have been criminally underutilizing you for 5 years, and I would like to stop." She looked at the paperwork, at the title on the document he'd had drawn up. Executive Director, not secretary, not assistant, not the person behind the glass who kept everything running while everyone else took the credit. "Dante suggested this," she said. "Dante observed that I should do something I was already planning to do," he said. "He's efficient. It's a professional trait." She looked up. "This is a question," he said again. "You can say no. You can negotiate the terms. You can take time to think about it." "You can." "Yes," she said. He stopped. "Yes," she said again. "I don't need time. I've been doing the job. I know what it is. And I've spent 5 years being the person who made things work while someone else had the title." She looked at him steadily. "I'm done with that. So yes." Something opened in his expression, genuine, uncalculated, the expression of a man who had offered something real and had it received the same way. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She picked up a pen and signed the document before either of them could make it more complicated than it needed to be. He watched her sign. "You know," he said, 3 years and 7 months ago, I sat in this office and looked at the DeLuca contracts and thought about what I wanted to say to you and said none of it. You said it eventually," she said. "It took a resignation letter and a Mafia war. Some people need a significant push," she said. "Is that what that was?" "That's what it was." She capped the pen and pushed the document across the desk. "For what it's worth, 3 years and 7 months ago, the week after the DeLuca situation, I went home and I sat in my apartment and I thought about the way you looked at the contracts when I put them on your desk." She met his eyes. "I thought about it for a long time, and then I decided I was a professional, and I went to sleep." "You could have said something," he said. "So could you?" He looked at her across her desk, his desk, in a way, the desk he'd been sitting across from for 5 years, The desk, where she'd signed a resignation letter that he'd put in his pocket and never returned. The desk, where she'd laid out 4 years of carefully assembled evidence and handed him the tools to save everything. And he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 3 years and 7 months, and change. Except now he wasn't putting it back in any drawer. "We wasted a lot of time," he said. "We did," she said. "Let's not waste what's left." He picked up the signed document. She watched him carry it out of her office, the office that was already quietly beginning to transform into something different from what it had been, the way everything was quietly, steadily transforming into something different from what it had been. And she turned to her computer, and she pulled up the Moretti Holdings accounts, and she started working. Not as his secretary, as herself. And it turned out that herself, after 5 years of being carefully invisible, took up considerably more space than anyone had expected. She didn't mind that at all. The first Monday Elena walked into the Moretti building as executive director of Moretti Holdings, nothing looked different. Same lobby, same elevator, same floor, same glass-walled office she'd occupied for 5 years. The furniture hadn't moved. The files were where she'd left them. The coffee maker in the corner still ran slightly hot, and nobody had fixed it because she'd always been the one who noticed things like that, and she'd been too busy noticing larger things to address the small ones. But something had shifted in the way people looked at her when she walked past. Not dramatically, not the way a movie would stage it, no parting crowds, no sudden silence. Subtler than that, the kind of shift that happened when people who had spent years categorizing someone in a specific way were quietly, without fanfare, doing the work of recategorizing. She caught it in the half-second of eye contact that lasted slightly longer than it used to. In the way 2 of the senior operations managers who had always looked through her now looked at her and made the micro-adjustment of people encountering someone whose title had just outranked them. She had spent 5 years being invisible. She was done with that. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, pulled up the Moretti Holdings consolidated account structure, and went to work. Not differently than she'd always worked, with the same precision, the same attention, the same capacity for holding 20 moving pieces simultaneously without losing the thread of any of them. But now the work had her name on it. Now the decisions she made had her signature underneath them. Now when something went right, and things went right consistently, because she was very good at this and had been for a long time, it went right because of Elena Rossi, executive director. Not because of whoever happened to be sitting behind the glass wall, keeping the machinery running. Adrian appeared in her doorway at 9:15. He didn't knock this time. He'd knocked for exactly 1 week, and then they'd agreed the knocking was more disruptive than useful, given that she could see him through the glass, and he could see her, and the knock was mostly performative. Stopped in the doorway, in a way that was its own version of asking permission. "Consolidated account review is on your desk," she said, without looking up. "Good morning to you too. Good morning. The consolidated account review is on your desk." He came in and sat not the guest chair. He'd stopped using the guest chair 3 weeks ago, and now just sat on the edge of her desk the way he'd done that first time, which was either territorial or comfortable, and she'd decided it was both, and that she didn't mind either. "How does it look?" "Better than it did under Nico, which is a low bar, but meaningfully better." She looked up. "The Northern property portfolio has 3 assets that haven't been actively managed in 8 years. They're generating minimal revenue and carrying maintenance costs that don't justify the carry. I want to restructure those positions. Do it. I need your signature on the restructuring documents. Then bring me the documents. They're already on your desk with the account review." He looked at her. "You had this ready before I walked in." "I had it ready yesterday," she said. "I was waiting for the morning so you'd have coffee first. The Bergen reallocation is going to require an argument, and I wanted you caffeinated for it." The near smile. "How much of an argument?" "Moderate. You're going to think I'm moving too fast. I'm going to tell you the data supports the timeline. You're going to want a third opinion. I'm going to tell you, I am the third opinion. I already consulted the first 2. She tilted her head. "We can skip to the part where you agree with me, or we can run the full version. Your choice." He looked at her for a long moment. "When did you get this comfortable arguing with me?" "I was always this comfortable," she said. I was just also employed by you, which added a layer of professional restraint. She met his eyes. I'm still employed by you. I've just recalibrated where the restraint applies. I see that. He picked up the file she'd set aside for him. The Bergen reallocation. Bergen reallocation, she confirmed. He opened it. She watched him read the focused, absorptive quality of his attention when he was working through something financial. The slight shift of his jaw, when he hit something he was going to push back on, and she let him get through the first 2 pages before she reached across and turned to page 4, where the projections were. Look at the 5-year trajectory before you decide, she said. He looked at page 4. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. I know. You could let me arrive at that, slightly less efficiently. I could, she said, but we have 8 more items on the agenda, and your 10 o'clock is the Caruso follow-up, which is going to run long because Marcus Caruso enjoys the sound of his own voice significantly more than the situation requires. And I'd like to get through the financial items before then. Adrian looked at her with the expression of a man who was simultaneously exasperated and the most settled he'd been in 20 years. Which she was learning was his baseline state in her presence, and which she was learning to read as the closest thing to contentment he knew how to wear. Brief me on everything else, he said. I'll sign where you tell me to sign. That's a dangerous level of trust. I've seen your work, he said. It's warranted. She briefed him on everything else. He signed where she told him to sign. The 10 o'clock with Marcus Caruso ran 40 minutes over schedule, and she managed it from her office by sending Adrian 2 precisely timed texts that allowed him to redirect the conversation without appearing to be redirected, which was a skill she had been deploying on his behalf for 5 years, and which Caruso, to his credit, never appeared to notice. It was, in other words, an ordinary morning, except that it wasn't. Not anymore, and she didn't want it to be. 6 weeks into her new role, the story got out. Not the classified version, not the audio recording, not Nico's betrayal, not the specifics of what had happened in the restaurant with Bellini. The version that got out was the surface version, the outline of it, the kind of story that moved through certain circles in New York, the way all significant power shifts moved in fragments, through intermediaries, accumulating detail with each retelling until it arrived somewhere resembling the truth without quite being it. What people heard was this: Adrian Moretti's personal secretary had been sitting on intelligence that dismantled Marco Bellini's 15-year operation. She had compiled it alone, protected it alone, and delivered it at the exact moment it was needed. She was now running the legitimate arm of the Moretti organization. The reactions were varied and instructive. 3 of the other families sent formal acknowledgments, the organizational equivalent of a raised glass, which was more than most of them had extended to anyone in the Moretti orbit in a decade. 2 of the senior operations managers who had spent 5 years looking through Elena asked for meetings with her within the same week, framed as wanting to align on organizational priorities, which she understood as the professional language of people recalibrating where the power actually lived. And Dante, who had known the real version of events from the beginning, sat across from her one afternoon with his coffee and his patient eyes and said, "How does it feel, having people actually see you?" She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. "Strange," she said, "like wearing a coat that fits perfectly after years of wearing one that was 2 sizes too large." She paused. "Good strange, but still strange. You'll get used to it." "I'm working on it." He looked at her with the expression she'd come to recognize as Dante about to say something he'd been sitting on. "He's different, you know. Since all of this," he nodded toward Adrian's office. "Not unrecognizable, but different. Softer isn't the right word, he's not softer. Steadier, maybe, like a structure that's been reinforced." He paused. "He smiles more. It's unsettling for the people who've worked with him for 20 years and have never seen it." "He's always had it," she said. "It's just been very small. You see things most people don't." I was paying attention. "So was he," Dante said, "to you." For longer than he ever admitted, he sipped his coffee. "I want you to know what you did, the 4 years. What it cost you to carry that alone." He stopped. Started again. "I've been in this organization a long time. I've seen loyalty in a lot of forms. What you did was the most significant act of loyalty I've ever witnessed, and it went unacknowledged for 4 years because nobody knew it was happening." He met her eyes. I know it now. I want you to know that I know. She looked at him. Dante Ricci did not make speeches. He made observations, occasionally in full sentences. This was the longest she'd ever heard him speak about something personal. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. Just don't do it alone again. Either of you. He stood. That's all I wanted to say. He left. She sat for a moment with what he'd said, the weight of it, the plainness of it. Just don't do it alone again. 4 words that contained the entire lesson of the last several months, distilled down to the form it took when a practical man wanted to say something true without making it larger than it needed to be. She wrote it on a notepad and put it in her desk drawer and left it there. The crisis, when it came, arrived from a direction nobody had been watching. It was a Tuesday in October, 8 weeks after the summit, and Elena was in the middle of a restructuring call with the Bergen property managers when Adrian appeared in her doorway with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the operational cold, not the controlled fury she'd cataloged from the Bellini situation. Something quieter and more personal than either of those, and therefore more alarming. She wrapped the call in 4 minutes, which was 6 minutes faster than the Bergen managers appreciated, and she walked to his office and closed the door. What happened? She said. He was standing at his window. He didn't turn. There's a journalist. She waited. Investigative. She's been working a piece on the Moretti organization for 8 months. She has sources inside the business community, legitimate side, not operational. She knows about the summit. She knows about Bellini. She knows about, he stopped, she knows about you. Elena felt the shift immediately, not panic, the other thing. The particular sharpening that happened when a new variable entered a situation she'd thought was resolved. How much does she know? Enough to make the story interesting. He turned. She knows you were his personal secretary. She knows you're now executive director. She knows there's a connection between those two things and the Bellini situation, and she's smart enough to understand the outline, even without the specific details. His jaw was tight. She's asked for a comment from both of us. What kind of piece? Her track record is serious journalism, not tabloid. The kind of piece that runs in a major paper and gets read by people who make policy. He looked at her. The kind of piece that, depending on how it's framed, could be a liability, she said, or an asset. He looked at her. I was going to say a liability. You were thinking in one direction, she said. Think in two. She came to stand beside him, always beside now, the positioning they'd both stopped thinking about consciously because it had become the default. If a serious journalist writes a serious piece about a woman who spent 4 years building an intelligence case against a criminal operation from inside the organization, alone, and delivered it at the exact moment it was needed, what does that story say? He was quiet. It says the legitimate side of this organization has exactly the kind of people in it that separate it from the operational side, she said. It says the executive director of Moretti Holdings is someone whose judgment and integrity held under conditions that broke a 22-year veteran of the organization. She looked at him. It says Adrian Moretti recognized that when he saw it and acted on it. You want to talk to her, he said. I want to control the narrative before the narrative controls us, she said. There's a version of this story that's a liability. There's a version that's the single best piece of public positioning this organization has had in 20 years. She met his eyes. Let me talk to her. Elena, this is my area, she said. You run the operations. I run the legitimate business infrastructure. A journalist writing a piece that affects public perception of Moretti Holdings is my area. She held his gaze steadily. Let me do my job. He looked at her for a long moment. Was the thing they had been practicing for 8 weeks the ongoing negotiation between his instinct to contain and protect and her insistence on full professional standing. He got it right more often than he got it wrong. He was still learning the difference between protecting someone and managing them. She was still learning the patience required to let him figure it out in real time rather than calling it out every time his instinct ran ahead of his intention. You talk to her with Dante in the building, he said. Fine, you see the questions in advance. That's not how journalism works. I know, I want it anyway. I'll ask, she said. She'll probably say no. When she says no, we proceed anyway, because the alternative is a story written entirely from other people's perspectives, which is worse. She paused. That's the deal. He exhaled. That's the deal. She called the journalist that afternoon. The journalist's name was Patricia Hale, and she had the careful, precise voice of someone who had learned to make people comfortable enough to talk without making them comfortable enough to say more than they'd planned. Elena recognized the technique because she used a version of it herself. They met for coffee 2 days later, in the same diner where Bellini's man had approached Elena 2 months ago. She'd chosen it deliberately. Patricia Hale was 50, sharp-eyed, with a recorder she placed on the table openly and a notepad she used in parallel, which told Elena she was thorough. She looked at Elena the way journalists looked at people they found genuinely interesting, which was different from the way they looked at people they found useful. "Thank you for meeting me," Patricia said. "You were going to write the piece either way," Elena said. "I'd rather be in the room," Patricia smiled. "Fair." She looked at her notepad. "I want to start with the role. You were personal secretary to Adrian Moretti for 5 years. I was, and now you're executive director of Moretti Holdings. I am. That's an unusual trajectory. It's a direct one if you understand what the role actually involved." Elena folded her hands on the table. "I want to be honest with you about something, Ms. Hale. The story you're working toward, the one about a secretary who turned out to be more than a secretary, that's a real story. But it has a frame problem." Patricia's eyebrows moved. "A frame problem. The frame that makes it interesting to most readers is the surprise of it. Secretary becomes executive director. That's the hook. The implication underneath the hook is that this was unexpected, that she was overlooked, underestimated, and then suddenly discovered." Elena looked at her steadily. "That frame isn't wrong, but it's incomplete, and the incomplete version does a specific kind of damage to the story's actual meaning." "Tell me the complete version," Patricia said. "The complete version is that the oversight was the design," Elena said. "Not mine, the organizational tendency to treat support roles as invisible. I used that invisibility as a tool for 4 years. I built something significant inside it, and when the moment came to deliver what I'd built, I delivered it." She paused. "The story isn't that a secretary became an executive. The story is that someone was doing executive-level work for 5 years while being paid and positioned as a secretary, and that when an organization finally looked honestly at what it had been benefiting from, it corrected the classification." She met Patricia's eyes. "That's a different story, and it's a better one." Patricia looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote something on her notepad. "You said you used the invisibility as a tool," Patricia said. "What does that mean specifically?" Elena told her. "Not everything, not the operational details, not the specifics that weren't hers to share, but the shape of it. The years of watching while not being watched. The patient accumulation of evidence by someone nobody considered a threat because nobody considered her at all. The specific power of being underestimated by dangerous people." Patricia wrote quickly and steadily. "One more question," Patricia said. "Adrian Moretti, what does he say about all of this?" Elena looked at her. "Ask him," she said. "He'll answer." Patricia did ask him. 2 days later, in a conversation Elena was not present for and did not ask about afterward, because she trusted him, and trusting him meant not needing to audit every room he entered. She found out what he'd said when the piece ran 3 weeks later, the same way everyone else found out. She was in her office when Dante put the paper on her desk, without a word, which was its own form of announcement. She read it. The piece was 3,000 words, front page of the business section, above the fold. Patricia Hale had done what she'd said she would do, written the complete version, the one with the right frame. The piece was about organizational blindness, about the infrastructure of invisibility that allowed essential work to go unattributed, about what happened when a company finally reckoned with what it had actually been built on. Elena was named. Her role was described accurately and without sensationalism. The arc from secretary to executive director was presented as the correction. It was not a sudden discovery, but a belated acknowledgement. And at the end of the piece, Adrian Moretti was quoted directly. She read the quote twice. "People assumed she was my weakness," he said. "They were wrong. She was the reason this organization survived. She was the reason I survived. I spent years telling myself that keeping someone at a distance was protecting them. What I've learned is that the people worth keeping are the ones who stay close enough to tell you when you're wrong." She stayed. I'm still learning what it cost her to do that, and I'm still learning what I owe her for it. What I know now is that the most important decision I've made in 20 years of running this organization was the one I made when she put a resignation letter on my desk. I told her she was staying. What I should have said was, I need you to stay. There is a difference. I'm working on understanding it. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the first ring. You read it. I read it. Is it? It's exactly right, she said. A pause. I meant what I said. I know you did. She looked at the paper. You told a journalist that you're still learning what you owe me. I am Adrian. She kept her voice level and let the full weight of what she was about to say land the way it needed to. You don't owe me. That's not what this is. If this is built on debt, on you spending the next 20 years trying to balance an account that you've decided is in arrears, then we've missed the entire point of the last 2 months. He was quiet. You don't owe me, she said. You chose me. I chose you. Those are parallel decisions made by two people who decided the other one was worth choosing. That's what we're building on. She paused. Not a ledger. The silence was long. You're right, he said. I know. You're always right. It's a significant, ongoing problem. You said that about Sophia. It applies to both of you. Another pause, softer. Come up to my office. There's something I want to say to you that I'm not going to say on the phone. She went. He was standing in the middle of his office, not at the window, not at his desk, in the middle of the room, which was unusual enough to register immediately. He'd clearly been there for a few minutes, working through something the way he worked through things, which was to stand very still and let the thinking happen, and then speak precisely. She came in. She stood in front of him. I've been thinking about what you said, he said. About debt versus choice. He looked at her steadily. You're right. And what I said to that journalist, I said it wrong. Not because it wasn't true, because I framed it the way I frame everything, which is as a transaction. Something owed, something to be paid. He paused. That's not what I want this to be. I know, she said. That's why I called. So if I want to say it differently. He took a step toward her, deliberate, unhurried, the way he moved toward everything that mattered to him. You stayed when leaving was the rational choice. You stayed when staying was dangerous. You stayed when the easiest thing in the world would have been to get on a plane to Montreal and spend the rest of your life being safe and uninvolved. He held her gaze. I spent years believing that people stayed in my orbit because of what I could offer them. Power, protection, position. I had a completely transactional understanding of why anyone was in this building. And now, she said, now I understand that you were never here because of any of that, he said. You were here because you chose to be, every day. Including the days when the choice was hard. He stopped in front of her. Close. I am not always going to get this right. I'm not always going to get the balance between protecting you and trusting you. I'm going to default to control sometimes, and you're going to call me on it, and I'm going to resist for approximately 20 minutes before admitting you're right. The near smile, full and unguarded, the one that still stopped her briefly every time she saw it. But I want to keep getting it wrong with you, for a significant amount of time. If you're willing, she looked at him, 5 years. 1 week of crisis, 2 months of rebuilding. A journalist piece folded on her desk downstairs with his quote at the end of it, the one that had gotten it wrong and also gotten it exactly right, the way first attempts often did. I'm willing, she said. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the smallest gesture, the kind that meant nothing and everything simultaneously, and he said, good. And she said, don't make me say it again. And he almost laughed, which was rarer than the smile and meant more, and the afternoon moved around them the way afternoons moved, when the thing you'd been holding your breath for had finally, fully arrived. 1 year after the resignation letter that had started everything, the Moretti organization looked different in ways both visible and invisible. The legitimate business arm had grown 40% under Elena's management. 3 unprofitable properties had been restructured. 2 new financial partnerships had been formalized with institutions that had historically kept distance from the Moretti name. The organizational chart had been rebuilt from the ground up, with positions held by people Elena had vetted, compensated fairly, and told directly what was expected of them, a management style so different from what the company had practiced previously that it generated In the first month, genuine confusion, and in the second month, genuine loyalty. Dante had stopped describing himself as semi-retired and started showing up for Monday morning briefings with a frequency that suggested he'd made a decision he hadn't announced yet. When Elena pointed this out to Adrian, he said he's not going to say it out loud. He's going to just keep showing up until it's too late to claim he was ever going to leave. She suspected he was right. Sophia called Elena on a Thursday afternoon in November, not to talk to Adrian and not to relay a message, just to talk the way that friendship developed between two people who recognized something in each other before they'd had the time to formally decide they were friends. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing critical. Sophia called again the following Thursday. The Thursday calls became a pattern neither of them formally acknowledged, which was, Elena thought, how the best patterns developed. Marcus Caruso sent a bottle of wine at Christmas, with a note in his own handwriting that said simply, "Properly done." Adrian read it, said nothing, and put it in his desk drawer. Elena suspected it stayed there, and Nico Ferraro, somewhere in the city's legal system, quietly took the kind of deal that people took when the evidence against them was absolute, and the alternative was significantly worse. His name was never spoken in the Moretti building. Not because it was forbidden, it wasn't, but because there was nothing useful left to say about him. And useful conversation was the currency of the people in that building, and they spent it carefully. On the one-year anniversary of the morning, Elena had walked in with a resignation letter she'd spent 3 weeks writing. She arrived at the office to find a single object on her desk. A folded piece of paper. She opened it. It was the resignation letter. Her resignation letter, the one she'd put on his desk, that he'd folded and put in his jacket pocket and never returned. He'd kept it for a year. At the bottom, underneath her signature, in Adrian's handwriting, precise, controlled, and entirely legible, were 4 words. Request denied. Come in. She laughed, fully genuinely the kind of laugh that caught her by surprise, because she hadn't been bracing for it the best kind. She was still laughing when she walked through the glass door into his office, letter in hand, and he looked up from his desk with the full, unhidden smile that still stopped her and always would. You kept it, she said. I told you were staying, he said. I wanted documentation. You wanted. She set the letter on his desk. You are an absurd man. You chose me anyway. I chose you anyway, she said. I'd choose you again. He looked at her across his desk, her desk, the desk they'd been on opposite sides of for 5 years, and the same side of for 1, and he said, same answer. Outside, New York moved at its usual relentless pace, full of noise and urgency, and the 1,000 overlapping stories of people building things and losing things, and finding their way back to what mattered. The Moretti building stood in the middle of it the way it always had, 20 floors of organized complexity, managed by people who understood that the difference between power and purpose was the people you chose to build it with. Inside, in an office that had been a secretary's and was now an executive's, and had always been both at once, Elena Rossi set her bag down and opened her laptop and got to work. Not invisible, not provisional, not the person behind the glass who made everything run while someone else took the credit. Herself, fully, finally, and Adrian Moretti, 20 years into running an empire that had been built on the premise that needing no one was the only safe way to move through the world, sat across from the woman who had dismantled that premise, without ever once announcing that she was doing it, and understood clearly, completely, without reservation, that the most dangerous thing he'd ever done was not a territory war or a summit negotiation or 20 years of operating in the dark. The most dangerous thing he'd ever done was ask a woman to stay. And the best thing that had ever happened to him was that she did.